Have you ever stopped to truly consider the power of language? It's humanity's most profound and lasting invention, the very tool that lets us share our thoughts, record our history, and dream of the future. Yet hidden beneath this familiar landscape of words and meaning lie ancient scripts so mysterious, so utterly baffling, that even today's brightest minds still can't fully understand them. These aren't just forgotten dialects or obscure symbols. They're enigmas carved in stone, written on clay, or painted on fragile pages, silent witnesses to lost civilizations whose voices we have yet to truly hear. Imagine standing before an artifact inscribed with writing no living person can read. You see the graceful curves, the sharp angles, the careful spacing, every mark made with clear intent. Someone, centuries or even millennia ago, meant to communicate something important. A story, a prayer, a law, a piece of history. And yet, its message remains locked away, suspended just beyond our reach. It's a feeling that blends awe with frustration, the tantalizing sense that we're so close to touching the past, yet still so far from understanding it fully. That is the haunting allure of undeciphered ancient languages. Today, we're setting out on a journey to explore 30 of these extraordinary linguistic puzzle scripts that have resisted translation despite decades, and in some cases centuries, of effort. From the intricate symbols of the Indus Valley Script to the cryptic codes of Rongorongo from Easter Island, each one tells a story not just of language, but of human ingenuity, loss, and the enduring drive to make sense of our shared heritage. This isn't just a list of curiosities, it's an invitation to step into the shoes of detectives deciphering the secrets of the ancient world. So settle in. You're about to discover why some of history's greatest conversations are still waiting to be heard. Our journey into the unknown begins not with a grand empire, but with an island Crete and a civilization that thrived long before the rise of classical Greece. Here, within the labyrinthine ruins of the magnificent palace of Knossos, archaeologists made a discovery that would both captivate and confound scholars for generations. Small, sun-baked clay tablets inscribed with an elegant yet utterly mysterious script. This is Linear A, dating back to the Minoan civilization's golden age between roughly 1800 and 1450 before the Common Era. These fragile records are our most direct window into the first advanced society of Europe, a people renowned for their stunning art, complex architecture, and, according to legend, a fearsome minotaur. The very name Linear comes from its distinct style. Unlike earlier hieroglyphic symbols also found on Crete, its characters are composed of fine, linear strokes, carefully incised into wet clay with a sharp stylus. It was a system sophisticated enough to handle administrative records, listing commodities like figs, wine, and olive oil, and it points to a highly organized bureaucratic state. For a long time, the story of Linear was intertwined with that of another script found at the same site, Linear B. The two look strikingly similar to the untrained eye, sharing many of the same signs and even the same format. This visual similarity initially offered a beacon of hope. If one could be cracked, surely the other would follow. That hope was realized for Linear B when the brilliant amateur linguist Michael Ventris made his historic breakthrough in 1952, proving it was an early form of Greek used by the later Mycenaean invaders. The decipherment of Linear B was a monumental achievement, but it inadvertently made the mystery of Linear even deeper and more isolating. You see, Ventris's success demonstrated that the approach was sound, but applying the same phonetic values from Linear B to Linear simply produced gibberish. It became painfully clear that Linear represents a completely different and still unknown language. This is the core of the puzzle. We can, to some extent, read Linear A. We can sound out the syllables of the words because we understand the script structure from its cousin. But we cannot understand it. We can pronounce the inventory lists, but we don't truly know what all the words mean. It's like hearing a beautiful song in a language you've never heard before. You can appreciate the melody and rhythm, but the meaning of the lyrics remains just out of grasp. This language isolate with no known relatives stands as a silent sentinel guarding the secrets of the Minoan world. What did they call themselves? What gods did they worship? What stories did they tell? The answers are all there, etched into those ancient tablets, waiting for the one key that has yet to be found. While the Minoans were building their palaces on Crete, another astonishing civilization was flourishing over 4,000 miles away in what is now modern-day Pakistan and northwest India. The Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan culture, was one of the most extensive and advanced societies of its time, rivaling ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Its cities, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were marvels of urban planning with sophisticated drainage systems, standardized bricks, and vast public baths. But perhaps their most tantalizing legacy is the one thing we cannot understand: their script, discovered primarily on small, intricately carved stone seals. These clusters of ancient symbols represent one of archaeology's most enduring and heated debates. The artifacts themselves are masterpieces of miniature art. Typically made of steatite, these seals often feature a beautiful depiction of an animal, a majestic bull, a powerful unicorn, a formidable tiger, and above that image a short line of script. These inscriptions are remarkably short, averaging only 4 or 5 symbols each. And that brevity is the heart of the problem. It's like trying to decipher the entire English language from a collection of random roadside signs. You might recognize a stop or a yield, but you'll never grasp the full depth of Shakespeare. With no surviving Rosetta Stone, no bilingual text that can act as a key, the Indus script remains locked in a vault to which we seem to have lost the combination. This has led some researchers to propose a radical and controversial idea that what we call the Indus Valley Script might not be a full language encoding speech at all, but rather a form of proto-writing. This could mean the symbols represent things like family clans, Chinese letter titles, or types of traded goods, more like a system of structured symbols or emblems rather than a true written language capable of recording poetry or prose. Proponents of this theory point to the short length of the inscriptions and their repetitive nature on similar types of objects. The opposing viewpoint, held by many others, argues the script shows all the hallmarks of a true written language, with a structured syntax and signs that change to indicate grammatical functions. They see a writing system that was simply designed for compactness, meant for brief labels and administrative stamping, not for lengthy historical records. Enter the modern era, where powerful computers have joined the fray, offering new tools for this ancient puzzle. Computational linguists and researchers have employed complex statistical analysis to search for patterns within the script's 400 or so distinct signs. They've analyzed the direction of writing, the frequency of sign combinations, and even the spatial relationships between symbols. Some studies using entropy analysis, a method that measures the randomness in a sequence, have found the Indus script's patterns to be comparable to known languages, lending weight to the argument that it is indeed a full-fledged language. Yet, these technological approaches are not without their critics, who caution that statistics can suggest possibility but not provide a definitive translation. Each new paper seems to add another layer to the mystery rather than peel one away. The ancient Harappans built their cities to last, and they built their secrets to last even longer. Their silent symbols continue to challenge us, a 4,000-year-old invitation to a conversation we are still learning how to join. From the sun-baked plains of the Indus Valley, we now travel to a very different kind of mystery, one not etched in stone but penned on fragile vellum, locked away in a vault at Yale University. This is the Voynich Manuscript, perhaps the most famously inscrutable book in the world. Unlike the administrative records of linear or the stamped seals of the Harappans, the Voynich is a complete and beautifully crafted codex, a 240-page volume filled from edge to edge with an unknown script and accompanied by illustrations so bizarre they seem to spring from a dream. Its vellum pages have been carbon dated to the early 15th century, placing its creation in the European Renaissance, a time of burgeoning knowledge and exploration. Yet it feels utterly alien, a complete outlier that conforms to no known linguistic or scientific tradition. The book is divided into distinct sections, each more puzzling than the last. The so-called herbal section contains page after page of breathtakingly detailed paintings of plants that simply do not exist, flora with impossible root structures, leaves that fuse into strange patterns, and blossoms that defy all botanical classification. Then there's the astronomical section, featuring circular diagrams of medallions and stars that suggest celestial charts, but for a sky we don't recognize. Perhaps most intriguing is the biological section, which includes a series of illustrations now famously known as the nymphs, numerous small, naked female figures bathing in or emerging from a complex network of green, tub-like structures that resemble an elaborate plumbing system or a surrealist garden. The final section is filled with unbroken text, arranged in short paragraphs next to what look like stars, suggesting some form of recipe or prescription. And then there is the writing itself. The script is elegant and flowing, written left to right with a confident hand. It consists of somewhere between 20 and 30 distinct characters, with some repetition that suggests it's alphabetic or syllabic. The text shows a statistical complexity that mirrors natural language. Certain characters appear frequently at the beginnings of words, others often come at the ends, and there are patterns that hint at syntax and grammar. This isn't random gibberish. It was clearly constructed with purposeful, intelligent design. For a century, this combination of visuals and verbiage has represented the ultimate challenge for cryptographers, from World War II codebreakers armed with pencils and paper to modern supercomputers running complex algorithms. Yet, every single attempted decipherment has ultimately crumbled under scrutiny. Proposed solutions have claimed it is everything from an encoded form of early Ukrainian to a forgotten Asian dialect or an elaborate hoax, but none have gained widespread acceptance because they fail to coherently translate more than a few isolated words. This relentless failure has led to a fascinating split in scholarly opinion. One camp remains convinced it is a cipher, a real language locked away behind a substitution code waiting for the right key to be found. The other, increasingly popular theory is that the Voynich Manuscript is an incredibly elaborate and expensive artifact of nonsense, a medieval equivalent of an abstract art project or a deliberate fake designed to deceive a wealthy patron. But even this theory is unsatisfying. The amount of painstaking labor involved, the consistent structure of the text, and the sheer oddity of the illustrations suggest a purpose, even if that purpose is forever lost to us. The Voynich Manuscript is a paradox. It is both overwhelmingly present as a physical object and completely absent in meaning. It sits there, whole and complete, daring us to understand it, a 400-year-old secret that continues to defiantly guard its mysteries. Yet as quickly as it appeared, the knowledge to read it was violently extinguished. The true tragedy of Rongorongo's silence begins not with a natural disaster, but with a human one. In the 1860s, the island was devastated by a series of brutal Peruvian slave raids. These expeditions specifically targeted the most educated and important members of the community, the island's priests, chiefs, and noble elders, who were the very individuals trained in reading and writing the sacred script. They were kidnapped en masse to work in the brutal conditions of Peru's guano mines, though international pressure eventually forced Peru to repatriate the survivors. This act of returning them proved to be a final, cruel blow. A small group of sick and dying islanders were put on a ship back to Rapa Nui, and they brought with them contagious diseases like smallpox and tuberculosis, which then ravaged the remaining population. In a matter of a few horrific years, the island's social structure was completely obliterated, and with it, the last living masters of Rongorongo. By the time the first serious Western researchers arrived, eager to learn the secrets of the tablets, the chain of knowledge had been severed beyond repair. The few remaining islanders could sometimes recognize the glyphs and even chant what they represented, but they could no longer explain the system or provide a true translation. They could sing the song, but they had lost the lyrics. This profound cultural trauma is what makes the decipherment of Rongorongo so uniquely heartbreaking and difficult. We are not just facing a linguistic puzzle, we are confronting the aftermath of a near-total genocide that deliberately targeted the intellectual class of an entire culture. Modern efforts to crack the code are hampered by several factors. There are only about 24 authentic tablets left in existence, and many are in poor condition, having been damaged by weather, insects, or well-meaning but misguided attempts at preservation. Furthermore, without a living connection to its original context, scholars cannot even agree on a fundamental question. Is Rongorongo a true writing system that fully represents spoken language, or is it a form of proto-writing, perhaps a sophisticated mnemonic device to help a reciter remember sacred chants, genealogies, or historical narratives? Some researchers note that the alternating direction of the lines, a technique known as reverse baustrophedon, is unique and might indicate a rhythmic, ceremonial purpose rather than straightforward prose. The glyphs themselves, often featuring humanoid figures, birds, fish, and ceremonial objects, seem deeply symbolic, but without the key to their symbolism, they remain beautiful, silent, and utterly mysterious. These wooden tablets are more than just artifacts. They are the last echoes of a lost world, a library of knowledge from a culture that mastered the Pacific, only to have its voice stolen at the very moment the outside world arrived. But to find the very first attempt, the genesis of this entire struggle, we must journey even further back in time, to the arid plains of ancient Iran around 3100 before the Common Era. Here in the Kingdom of Elam, scribes were embarking on a breathtakingly ambitious experiment. They were inventing writing from the ground up, and the system they created, known today as proto-elamite, holds the sobering title of the world's oldest undeciphered script. It represents that first, fragile spark of recorded thought, a system so early and so experimental that it seems to have faltered almost as soon as it began, leaving behind a legacy of profound mystery. What makes proto-elamite so significant and so incredibly difficult to crack is its raw, pioneering nature. It wasn't derived from any known system, making it a true isolate with no relatives to provide clues. The scribes used a sharp stylus to press these signs into soft clay tablets, creating a distinctive, angular script that looks remarkably abstract and mathematical to our modern eyes. And this is the first major clue we have. We can actually understand a great deal of its numerical system. The scribes used different shaped signs to clearly denote specific quantities, circles for tens, small circular impressions for units, and larger signs for higher values. This tells us without a shadow of a doubt that we are looking at the administrative records of a complex society deeply concerned with accounting and the management of goods. We can often follow the basic math on a tablet. You can see an entry for, say, 47 units of something, followed by another entry and a total sum at the bottom. The numbers are clear. It's the something that remains the complete mystery. The script uses over 1,000 different signs next to these numbers, many of them intricate and highly detailed. Some are recognizable as animals, goats, cattle, dogs, suggesting they were counting livestock. Others are abstract symbols that likely represented commodities like grain, oil, or textiles, or perhaps even the names of individuals, titles, or places involved in these transactions. This was likely the very purpose of its invention, to create a bureaucratic tool for tracking the economy of a growing state, a practical solution to the problem of managing wealth and resources. Yet, this incredible invention appears to have been abandoned after only a few centuries. The script simply vanishes from the archaeological record, replaced by a later, deciphered writing system. Why would a society give up on such a powerful technology? The prevailing theory is that proto-elamite was simply too cumbersome, too limited, and too difficult to learn. It may have been a system that only a small, elite class of scribes could ever master. Perhaps it couldn't efficiently adapt to record more complex ideas beyond basic lists and accounts. It couldn't tell stories, write laws, or compose prayers. It was a tool with one specific job, and when that job changed or a more efficient system was encountered through trade, it was discarded. The silence of proto-elamite is therefore a silence of immense potential. It shows us the very moment of creation, a brave and brilliant first draft of history that was ultimately left unfinished, a conversation that started but was never able to truly find its voice. But before the elegant lines of linear flowed across Minoan clay tablets, the scribes of Crete were experimenting with an even more visually arresting form of record-keeping. Long forgotten and only rediscovered by modern archaeology, this system presents us with a script that lives up to the romanticism of its name, Cretan hieroglyphs. It's crucial to understand that the term hieroglyph here doesn't imply a direct connection to Egypt, though the cultures were certainly in contact. Instead, it simply denotes a writing system that relies on pictorial symbols, beautiful, detailed, and miniature works of art that were meant to convey language. Dating to the early 2nd millennium before the Common Era, this script is the oldest writing found on Crete, predating the more linear systems that would follow. You find it not on large administrative tablets, but on small, personal, and incredibly durable objects, clay seals and bars. These were practical items used to stamp and mark ownership on goods, containers, and doors, the ancient equivalent of a wax seal on a letter or a lock on a storage unit. The fact that these artifacts were meant to be pressed into clay time and again meant the symbols had to be carved in mirror image, a testament to the skill and intention of the craftsmen. Each tiny seal is a masterpiece, often no larger than a thumbnail, yet bearing a complex arrangement of symbols that are astonishing in their clarity and detail. And what symbols they are, this is what truly sets Cretan hieroglyphs apart and earns its reputation as one of the most visually striking undeciphered scripts in the world. The repertoire includes a vibrant and often charming cast of characters drawn directly from the Minoan world. You see the unmistakable silhouette of a cat's head, a mischievous-looking monkey, a curled octopus with tentacles splayed, a variety of fish, and the ever-important cow's head with its sweeping horns. Interspersed with these naturalistic images are more abstract geometric shapes, crosses, arrows, chevrons, and star-like designs. The overall impression is not of a dry, bureaucratic list, but of a vibrant and almost playful symbolic language, a direct window into the fauna and objects that held significance in their daily life. The fundamental question and the core of the decipherment puzzle is what these pictures actually represent. Do they work as logograms where each picture stands for an entire word, a cat symbol meaning simply cat? Or did the Minoans take a revolutionary step and use them as syllabic signs, where the picture of a cat might represent not the animal itself, but the sound ka or mai, becoming a purely phonetic building block for spelling out words that had nothing to do with felines? This is the leap that turns a system of pictures into a true writing system capable of expressing any thought. The limited number of signs, estimated to be around 130, suggests it was likely a syllabic system, but without a lengthy bilingual text or a much larger corpus of inscriptions, we cannot be certain. We are left appreciating the art without understanding the artist's statement. These seals are the proud, silent signatures of a brilliant civilization at the very dawn of its literacy, a beautiful and complex puzzle whose first pieces we are only just beginning to turn over. Leaving the Mediterranean, our search for lost voices brings us to the heart of the Italian peninsula, to a civilization that would profoundly shape the course of Western history, the Etruscans. Long before Rome became an empire, the Etruscans were the dominant cultural and technological force in the region, renowned for their sophisticated metalwork, advanced architecture, and complex religious practices. They passed on a tremendous legacy to the Romans, from the symbols of political power like the fasces to the brutal spectacle of gladiatorial games. Most significantly, they gave Rome its alphabet, the very tool it would use to record its own rise to glory. And yet, for all their influence, the Etruscans themselves speak to us from across the centuries in a language that remains stubbornly and ironically silent. We can read their words, but we cannot truly hear their voice. This is the central paradox of the Etruscan language. Unlike many of the scripts we've discussed, Etruscan is not a problem of unknown characters. We can read the letters perfectly well. The Etruscans used an alphabet derived from the Greeks, which was in turn adapted by the Romans into the Latin script that forms the basis of much of the world's writing today. The letters look familiar. An A is an A, a B is a B. The challenge lies not in the script but in the language itself. Etruscan is a non-Indo-European language, a linguistic island in a sea of related tongues. While Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, and even modern English, French, and Hindi all share a common ancestral root, Etruscan stands completely apart. It has no known living relatives, making it a language isolate. This means we have no sister language to use for comparison, no linguistic ladder to help us climb over the wall of understanding. We are essentially trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces fit together in a pattern entirely unique to the box they came in. Our primary sources for the language are both abundant and frustratingly limited. Archaeologists have discovered over 13,000 Etruscan inscriptions, a number that seems promising at first glance. However, the vast majority of these are incredibly short and formulaic. They are funerary epitaphs carved on sarcophagi and tomb walls, typically stating little more than the name of the deceased, their parents' names, and their age at death. It's the ancient equivalent of trying to reconstruct modern English solely from the text on gravestones. You would learn a great deal about names and familial relationships, but you would miss the richness of literature, law, poetry, and daily conversation. These inscriptions provide us with a solid, if small, vocabulary of nouns related to family and death, but they offer only fleeting glimpses into verbs, grammar, and syntax. The hope for any decipherment effort always rests on the discovery of a bilingual text, a Rosetta Stone that can act as a translation key. For Etruscan, we have what might be called micro-bilinguals. The most famous is the Pyrgi tablets, a set of 3 gold leaves discovered at an ancient port. 2 of the tablets are inscribed in Etruscan, and a third contains a parallel text in Phoenician, a well-understood language. This was a monumental find, but the text itself is a dedication from a ruler to a goddess, and it is very short and highly ritualized. It allowed scholars to confirm the meanings of a few dozen words related to religious offering and divine names, but it did not throw open the doors to the entire language. It was a single, bright flashlight beam in a vast, dark room, illuminating a small corner but leaving the rest in shadow. Consequently, our understanding of Etruscan is a patchwork of confirmed facts and educated guesses. We know the numbers for 1 through 6 thanks to finds like gaming dice labeled with numerals. We have a growing vocabulary of perhaps 200 solidly understood words. But we struggle with the fundamental structure of the language, its grammar. For instance, we can see that Etruscan used suffixes to change the meaning of words, a feature common in many languages, but the precise rules governing these changes are still debated. The Etruscans were also known for producing linen books, a fact mentioned by Roman authors. One rare survival is the Liber Linteus Zagrebiensis, the linen book of Zagreb, a text wrapped around an Egyptian mummy and preserved by chance. It is the longest Etruscan text known, over 1,200 words long. It appears to be a religious calendar detailing rituals for specific dates. But without a clear bilingual reference, it remains a lengthy, detailed manual for a ceremony we cannot fully comprehend, a script for a play where we know the actions but not the dialogue's meaning. The ultimate fate of the language adds a layer of historical poignancy to the mystery. As Rome grew in power, it systematically absorbed Etruscan culture. The Etruscan language was gradually suffocated by the rising tide of Latin, becoming a marker of a fading, archaic world. By the time of the early Roman Empire, it was essentially extinct, a dead language known only to a few antiquarians and priests. The very people who taught Rome how to write ended up being rendered silent by their prodigy's success. Today, the Etruscan language stands as a ghost in the machine of Western civilization. Its words visible everywhere in its alphabet's descendants, but its own stories and wisdom locked away behind the veil of its isolation, a reminder that even the most influential voices can be lost to time. Moving south along the Nile, far beyond the borders of ancient Egypt, we find a kingdom whose power and ambition once rivaled that of the pharaohs themselves. This was the kingdom of Kush, centered in what is now modern Sudan, a civilization that conquered Egypt and ruled as its 25th dynasty. The Kushites were not mere imitators, they were innovators, absorbing Egyptian culture and then transforming it into something uniquely their own. Their most profound and lasting innovation was the creation of the Minoanic script, a writing system that presents us with a decipherment challenge unlike any other. For while we can perfectly read the sounds of this ancient language, we remain almost completely deaf to its meaning. The story of Minoanic begins with cultural contact. Initially, the Kushite elite used the Egyptian language and hieroglyphic system for their official monuments and records. But around the 2nd century before the Common Era, a profound shift occurred. They developed not one, but two distinct scripts of their own. A majestic pictorial hieroglyphic script for monumental inscriptions on temple walls and royal stelae, and an elegant, cursive script for everyday administrative use on papyrus and pottery shards. While they look different, both scripts are two sides of the same coin, representing the same language and using the same set of 23 phonetic signs. This was a monumental achievement, one of the first alphabetic writing systems developed in Africa, a streamlined and efficient method of recording speech that stood in stark contrast to the hundreds of signs required for Egyptian hieroglyphs. This efficiency is precisely why we can read it today. The brilliant British Egyptologist Francis Llewellyn Griffith cracked the script's phonetic code back in 1909. He achieved this by using the one tool every decipherer dreams of finding: royal names. On funerary tablets, he noticed that the same group of cursive signs appeared in the same prominent position where Egyptian texts would typically place the name of a ruler, surrounded by funerary formulae. By comparing these to the royal names known from historical records and from the corresponding hieroglyphic inscriptions, which often featured cartouches, he was able to assign sound values to each sign. He confirmed his work by identifying the Minoanic word for son and daughter through their repetitive use in genealogies. It was a masterful piece of scholarly detective work, and it gave us the key to pronounce every known Minoanic text with a high degree of confidence. And that is where the victory ends and the immense frustration begins. We can sound out the words, but we have almost no idea what those words actually mean. Imagine being handed a book written in a foreign alphabet you've just learned. You can read the entire text aloud with perfect pronunciation, yet you understand nothing of the story being told. This is the precise predicament of Minoanic studies. We are fluent in its pronunciation but utterly illiterate in its comprehension. The reason is the catastrophic lack of a substantial bilingual text. While a handful of short, damaged Egyptian Minoanic stelae have been found, they are not the rich, lengthy Rosetta Stone-like documents we desperately need. They provide only tiny, fragmentary phrases, like getting a few words from a dictionary rather than entire sentences from a book. This leaves linguists with a painfully small toolbox. The primary strategy now is one of careful, patient guessing based on context. If a certain string of sounds appears repeatedly at the beginning of funerary inscriptions, scholars might hypothesize that it means here lies or eternal life. If another word consistently appears after lists of goods in administrative texts, it might mean received or delivered, but these are just educated guesses that are nearly impossible to verify. The language has no known living relatives. It is another isolate, completely unrelated to its Egyptian neighbor or any other well-documented language family in the region. This isolation means we have no sister language to provide hints or shared vocabulary. The few words we are certain about are titles like Kor for king and Kandik for queen or queen mother, which were recorded by classical authors like Strabo and have survived in historical memory. Beyond that, the vast vocabulary of the Kushite kingdom, their laws, their literature, their prayers, their personal letters remains a tantalizing secret, a library of lost knowledge written in a language we can sing but cannot speak. The voices of this mighty African civilization are clear as a bell, yet they echo in a room whose walls we have yet to find. Far to the west of the Old World, another cradle of civilization was giving birth to its own systems of writing entirely independently. In the lush, humid landscapes of ancient Mesoamerica, among the Olmecs, often called the mother culture of the region, a script emerged that is every bit as enigmatic as those we've encountered across the ocean. This is the Isthmian script, a writing system whose brief but stunning appearances have ignited one of the most intense and unresolved debates in the field of New World archaeology. Its story is told on just a handful of priceless artifacts, each one a masterpiece that raises far more questions than it answers. The two most famous and important of these objects are the La Mojara stela and the Tuxtla statuette. The Tuxtla statuette, discovered in 1902, is a small, intriguing figure made of green nephrite jade, carved in the form of a duck-billed humanoid. What made it an instant sensation was the fact that it was covered in beautifully incised hieroglyphic writing, and it bore a date inscription correlating to 162 Common Era, making it one of the oldest dated writing samples in the Americas at the time of its discovery. But it was the later find, the La Mojara stela, that truly set the archaeological world alight. Unearthed from a river in Veracruz, Mexico in 1986, this massive 6.5-foot tall stone slab is a tour de force of early Mesoamerican art and writing. On one side, it depicts an elaborately dressed ruler standing in a pose of authority, and on the other, it is covered in a long, dense columns of intricate glyphs, the longest single Isthmian text known to exist, featuring over 500 individual characters. The visual style is distinct with its own elegant, angular flair, yet it feels hauntingly familiar to anyone who has seen early Mayan writing. This similarity is the very heart of the great Isthmian debate. The central question is one of relationship and descent. Does the Isthmian script represent the direct ancestor of Mayan writing? Is it a sister script, both descended from an even older, yet to be discovered Olmec parent writing system? Or is it something else entirely, a separate, isolated development by a different culture, perhaps the Zoque people, that flourished and then died out without directly influencing the famous Maya scribes? The evidence is tantalizingly ambiguous. The two systems share a similar structural principle. They are both logosyllabic, meaning they use a combination of signs that represent whole words and signs that represent syllables. They also share a few glyphs that look remarkably similar, suggesting a potential genetic link. Proponents of the Maya connection theory argue that Isthmian is that missing link, the proto-Mayan script that demonstrates how writing evolved in the region. On the other side of the argument, skeptics point to the significant differences. the syllabic values where they have been proposed don't seem to align neatly with Mayan language patterns. The grammatical structure implied by the order of the glyphs appears distinct. This has led other researchers, most notably the late epigrapher John Justison and linguist Terence Kaufman, to propose a bold alternative. After decades of analysis, they suggested that the language behind the Isthmian script is not Mayan at all, but an early form of Zoque, a language from the Mix-Zoquian family spoken in the very region where the artifacts were found. They even published a proposed decipherment, arguing that the text on the La Mojara stela tells the story of a ruler named Harvester Mountain Cloud, detailing his ascent to power, a military victory, and a ritual bloodletting ceremony to mark an important calendar period. However, this decipherment has not been widely accepted by the broader academic community. The main criticism is that the methodology relies heavily on assuming the text's content based on the depicted image of the ruler and known Mesoamerican themes, then working backwards to assign sound values to the glyphs. It's a bit like guessing the lyrics of a song by looking at the album cover. Without a much larger corpus of texts or a clear bilingual monument, it's incredibly difficult to verify any decipherment claim. The Isthmian script remains a closed book, its beautiful glyphs a promise of history that we can see but cannot yet read, a silent testament to the sophisticated intellectual world of Mesoamerica's earliest civilizations. But to find the very roots of writing in the Americas, we must travel back even further in time, to the very first civilization of Mesoamerica, the Olmec. Often called the mother culture of the region, the Olmec are famed for their colossal stone heads and their profound influence on all subsequent societies from the Maya to the Aztecs. For a long time, a central question haunted archaeologists: did this foundational culture also possess that most defining hallmark of civilization, a true writing system? The answer, it turns out, may be written on a single, extraordinary and deeply controversial stone. This is the Cascajal block, a slab of serpentine rock that, if authentic, rewrites the entire history of writing in the New World. Discovered in a gravel quarry in the Olmec heartland of Veracruz, Mexico, in the late 1990s, the Cascajal block doesn't look like a typical monumental inscription. It's a portable object about the size and weight of a large tablet computer, and its surface is covered in 62 finely carved glyphs. These aren't just random scratches, they are arranged in clear, horizontal rows, and the symbols themselves are remarkably diverse. There are abstract shapes, but also clear depictions of familiar items from the Olmec world: an insect, an ear of corn, a throne, and even a figure that looks strikingly similar to the iconic word jaguar motif seen in Olmec art. The arrangement suggests a structured sequence, a text that was meant to be read in a specific order, not just a collection of symbols. Most astonishingly, radiocarbon dating of organic material found stuck to the stone pointed to an origin around 900 years before the Common Era. This would make it the oldest written text in the Americas by several centuries, predating the Isthmian script and the earliest Mayan writing by a wide margin. The discovery was met with a mixture of exhilaration and intense skepticism, a debate that continues to this day. The primary concern is the object's provenance. It wasn't found in a controlled archaeological excavation by professionals, but rather by road builders who were quarrying gravel. This means we lack the crucial contextual information that archaeologists rely on: what layer of soil it came from, what other artifacts were found with it. This opens the door, however slim, to the possibility of an elaborate modern forgery. Critics also point to the unique nature of the block itself. It is a one-of-a-kind find, with no other examples of this specific script having ever been discovered. In archaeology, a single data point is always treated with caution. Yet, the arguments for its authenticity are equally powerful. The symbols are not copied from any known later writing system. They are entirely unique. A forger would have had to possess an incredible depth of knowledge about obscure Olmec iconography, to invent a completely new set of plausible glyphs that still feel authentically Olmec. Furthermore, the text shows signs of what linguists call script-specific constraints. Certain signs appear repeatedly, while others are used only once, a pattern typical of a functioning writing system. There is also evidence of a possible sign rotation, where a symbol is turned on its side, a feature known in other early scripts where the rules of writing were still being established. It feels less like a modern fake and more like an experimental early form of writing, perhaps even a first draft. If the cascadal block is genuine, its implications are staggering. It suggests that the Olmec, at the very dawn of complex society in the region, were not only sculptors and architects but also scribes, experimenting with the representation of language. This would position them as the likely inventors of the core concept that later blossomed into the Isthmian and Mayan scripts. They would be the Mesoamerican equivalent of the Sumerians, the pioneering innovators who first captured speech in stone. The block's portable nature hints that writing may have begun not for grand royal proclamations, but for more personal or economic purposes, perhaps a dedication, a prayer, or a record of lineage. It represents a whisper of a possibility, a single page from a lost library of Olmec literature that we never knew existed. Whether ultimate proof or profound puzzle, the cascadal block stands as a tantalizing challenge, daring us to believe that the first words of the Americas were spoken in stone by the earliest masters of Mesoamerican culture. Now, from the grand, sweeping narratives of Mesoamerican civilizations, we turn our attention to a much smaller, yet infinitely more perplexing object. Imagine an artifact so unique, so utterly singular, that it almost feels like it fell out of time. This is the Phaistos disc, and it remains one of the most captivating and controversial puzzles ever to emerge from the ancient world. Discovered in 1908 by the Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernia within the ruins of the Minoan palace of Phaistos on Crete, the disc is a humble object made of baked clay, roughly the size of a small dinner plate. But its modest physical appearance belies its profound mystery. On both of its faces, a continuous sequence of symbols is carefully stamped in a perfect spiral, coiling from the outer edge inward toward the center. It is, in essence, the world's oldest known printed document, a snapshot of a thought process frozen in clay over 3,500 years ago. What makes the disc so instantly fascinating is its method of creation. Each of the 45 distinct symbols featuring human figures, animals like birds and fish, plants, ships, shields, and a variety of abstract marks, was not incised by hand with a stylus like linear A or B. Instead, they were pressed into the soft clay using individually crafted seals or punches. This means the maker possessed a full set of prefabricated type, a movable type printing press millennia before such a technology would appear elsewhere. This single fact elevates the disc from a curious inscription to a technological marvel, suggesting a level of bureaucratic efficiency or artistic intention that is simply staggering for its time. And yet, this very uniqueness is the source of the disc's greatest controversy and the primary reason it has resisted all attempts at decipherment. The problem is isolation. Not a single other example of this script, or even a fragment of a similar stamped text, has ever been found anywhere on Crete or in the wider world. In archaeology, context is everything. We decipher ancient languages by finding multiple examples, comparing how signs are used in different words and positions, and slowly building a statistical model of their patterns. The Phaistos disc has no context. It is a single, solitary data point in a sea of silence. It would be like trying to decipher the entire English language from a single, short poem with no other text to provide clues. Without a larger corpus, any attempt at translation is little more than an educated guess, a Rorschach test where scholars can project almost any meaning onto the enigmatic symbols. This profound isolation has perhaps inevitably led to whispers of doubt. Could the Phaistos disc be an elaborate forgery, the theory, while not embraced by the majority of archaeologists, is persistent. Skeptics point to the circumstances of its discovery during a period when sensational finds could bring fame and funding, and to the fact that Pernia never made another significant discovery in his career. They argue the disk is almost too perfect, too neat in its conception, standing alone without any of the messy evolutionary predecessors we would expect to find. Furthermore, the precise, stamped symbols show no signs of the wear and tear we see on seals that were actually used repeatedly on clay. Proponents of its authenticity counter that no forger in the early 20th century could have possibly possessed the deep knowledge of Minoan iconography present on the disk, knowledge that has only been confirmed by later excavations. The symbols are authentically Minoan, even if the method of applying them is without parallel. Whether ancient artifact or modern hoax, the disk continues to be a siren call for decipherers. Over 100 full attempts have been proposed, claiming it contains anything from a prayer to a narrative poem to a geometric theorem. Some see it as a palace inventory list, while others argue the spiral form suggests a ritual calendar or an astrological chart. But each theory collapses under the same inevitable weight. There is nothing to check it against. The Phaistos disk is the ultimate locked room mystery, a message from the past that is complete in itself yet offers no way to verify its own meaning. It stands as a bold, brilliant, and utterly frustrating anomaly, a single page from a book whose every other page has been lost to time, leaving us to wonder if we are holding a profound religious text or simply the ancient world's most beautiful and enduring piece of bureaucratic paperwork. While the Minoans and the people of the Indus Valley were developing their own complex systems, a crucial evolution in the very idea of writing was taking place further east along the coast of the Mediterranean. Our next script brings us to the ancient city of Byblos, a bustling Phoenician port and a major hub for the papyrus trade, so influential that its name would eventually become the root for the word Bible in Greek. It was here, in the early 20th century, that archaeologists uncovered a set of 10 enigmatic inscriptions that seemed to promise a direct link to one of history's most important breakthroughs, the invention of the alphabet. This is the Byblos syllabary, also known as the Proto-Biblian or pseudo-hieroglyphic script, and it represents a potential missing link in the story of how we write. Dating from the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, these inscriptions are carved on bronze spatulas and stone tablets, and they present a script that looks like a simplified, streamlined version of Egyptian hieroglyphs. The signs are pictorial. You can see a human head, a fish, a house, but they are rendered with an elegant economy of line, a clear move away from the detailed artistry of Egyptian writing towards something more practical and efficient. This visual connection is what makes the Byblos syllabary so tantalizing. Scholars have long theorized that the first true alphabet, the Phoenician script that would give rise to the Greek and Latin writing systems we use today, was inspired by a simplification of Egyptian hieroglyphs. The Byblos syllabary appears to be that very evolutionary step caught in the act. It looks like a bridge, a halfway point between the complex, hundreds of signs system of Egypt and the simple, 22-letter consonantal alphabet of the Phoenicians. This promise of a Rosetta Stone-like key to the alphabet's origin has naturally led to numerous attempts at decipherment, each one claiming a major victory. Perhaps the most famous effort was led by the French Egyptologist Maurice Dunand, who worked on the inscriptions for decades. Another significant claim came from the German linguist Georg Mendenhall, who proposed that the language behind the script was a very early form of Phoenician, and that the writing system was actually syllabic, where each sign stood for a consonant followed by a specific vowel. His work was detailed and ambitious, producing translations that spoke of dedications to gods and local rulers. More recently, other scholars have built upon these ideas, using computational methods to analyze sign frequencies and patterns. Yet, despite these confident proclamations, not a single one of these decipherments has achieved universal acceptance within the academic community. The reasons for this ongoing skepticism are as fascinating as the script itself and get to the very heart of the difficulty of linguistic archaeology. The first and most obvious problem is the sheer lack of material. With only 10 brief inscriptions to work with, the sample size is catastrophically small. Decipherers are trying to reconstruct an entire linguistic system from a handful of phrases. It's like trying to understand the rules of English grammar from a few random sentences on postcards. There simply isn't enough text to perform the rigorous statistical analysis needed to confirm a hypothesis beyond a reasonable doubt. The second major hurdle is the absence of a verifiable bilingual text. While some of the inscriptions include carvings of Egyptian deities like the god Bes, suggesting a cultural connection, they do not provide a word-for-word parallel translation. Without a known language sitting right next to the unknown one, acting as a key, any decipherment is forced to rely on assumptions. A researcher might assume the text is a dedication to a king or a god, then try to match sign patterns to known words for king or god in a proposed language like early Semitic. But if that initial assumption is wrong, the entire intricate house of cards built upon it collapses. This leads to the third problem, the inability to verify claims. If one scholar's translation reads as a royal dedication and another's reads as a merchant's inventory list, and both are internally consistent with their own proposed rules, how do we determine who is right? Without new, lengthier inscriptions to test these models against, they remain intriguing but unproven theories. The story of the Biblo-syllabary is therefore a story of immense potential forever hovering on the brink of fulfillment. It represents that thrilling moment in historical research where a discovery seems to perfectly fit a long-standing theoretical gap. We can almost see the ancient scribes of Byblos at work, adapting the powerful writing system of their Egyptian trading partners into something faster, easier, and more suited to their own commercial and administrative needs. We can almost read it, but the evidence for now remains just out of reach, a silent testament to a pivotal moment of innovation whose full story we are still not privileged to hear. But what if an entire language wasn't written at all, but tied into existence? Our journey now takes us high into the Andes Mountains, to the realm of the mighty Inca Empire, where we encounter a recording system so ingenious and so completely alien to our own concept of writing that it challenges the very definition of the word. This is the Quipu, a complex array of knotted chords that served as the central nervous system of the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas. For a long time, Western scholars dismissed these devices as simple accounting tools, primitive calculators for keeping track of grain, livestock, and population numbers. But a growing body of evidence suggests we have profoundly underestimated them. The Quipu may be something far more revolutionary, a three-dimensional, tactile writing system capable of encoding narrative history, poetry, and lore. At first glance, a Quipu seems deceptively simple. It consists of a main, horizontal chord from which multiple pendant chords hang down, but look closer and an astonishing complexity reveals itself. The Inca bureaucrats, known as Quipucamayos, used a sophisticated vocabulary of knots. The type of knot, its position on the chord, the spin and ply of the string itself, and even the color of the chords all carried specific meanings. A decimal positional system was at its heart. Different types of knots represented units, tens, hundreds, and thousands. This much we can understand, as Spanish chroniclers recorded how the Inca used quipus for census data and inventory. But the real mystery lies in the non-numerical codes. What information was held in the specific sequence of 24 different colors of string? What stories were told through the intricate way chords were tied together or attached to the main strand? The tragic obstacle to answering these questions is one of history's great cultural losses. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they recognized the Quipu not as a library, but as an idolatrous object and a tool of the pagan state they sought to dismantle. In a systematic campaign of cultural erasure, Catholic priests, following the directives of the Third Leme, a council in 1583, ordered the destruction of thousands upon thousands of Quipus. They were burned in vast pyres, their knowledge lost forever in the smoke. This act was the equivalent of burning every book in a kingdom, and it severed the living link to understanding. The few hundred Quipus that survive today are mostly later, simpler versions from remote villages, lacking the complexity of the great imperial records. The master Quipucamayos, the living librarians who held the key to reading these devices, were gone, their knowledge dying with them. Yet recent discoveries are offering glimmers of hope and forcing a dramatic rethink. Archaeologists are now finding Quipus in previously unknown contexts, buried in ritual bundles with sacred objects, suggesting they held more than just tax records. Furthermore, a remarkable breakthrough came from studying the intricate structure of the chords themselves. Researchers like Harvard anthropologist Gary Urton have proposed that every aspect of a quipu's construction, from the direction of the twist of the strings to the way the knots were tied, was a binary choice, a bit of data in a complex system. He suggests that a single quipu could contain a 7-bit binary code capable of storing over 1,500 unique units of information, a capacity that far exceeds simple bookkeeping. The most compelling evidence for the quipu as a narrative language may come from a surviving colonial document. In the Spanish archives, a will was discovered from a Quechua man that had been transcribed from a quipu presented as evidence in a land dispute. The document states it is a direct translation of the knots, and it contains not numbers but a flowing, personal narrative detailing family lineage and property history. This single, precious record proves that the quipu could and did hold full, complex stories. It was a medium for literature. The great Andean mystery is no longer if the quipu was a writing system, but how to read the few precious examples that escaped the flames, to once again hear the stories tied into their intricate and silent knots. Our journey now takes us from the vast, organized empire of the Inca to a single, lonely fragment of rock on the other side of the world, a relic that proves even the smallest artifact can hold a mystery of immense proportions. This is the Singapore stone, and its story is one of both tantalizing possibility and profound loss. In the 19th century, at the mouth of the Singapore River, a massive sandstone slab was discovered, nearly 3 meters high and 3 meters wide, covered on one face with an elegant, deeply incised inscription. For the local population, it was simply a part of the landscape, a familiar marker known as the Lion City Stone. But to the British colonizers who encountered it, it was an enigma, an obvious and ancient record of a history they knew nothing about. Tragically, in 1843, the stone was blasted apart by the British to make way for fortifications and to widen the passageway for a military barracks. This act of colonial expediency shattered a priceless piece of heritage into several pieces. Most of these fragments were lost, discarded, or built into the very walls of the new structures. Only one small piece, roughly the size of a large textbook, was saved. It was sent to the Calcutta Museum for study, and it is this solitary fragment, now housed in the National Museum of Singapore, that is all that remains of this monumental inscription. We are left with a heartbreakingly small clue to a much larger story. A single paragraph from a book that was deliberately destroyed. The script carved into this surviving fragment is the core of the mystery. The characters are graceful and curvilinear, showing a clear influence from scripts used across South and Southeast Asia during the 10th to 13th centuries. At a glance, it bears a resemblance to scripts used to write Old Javanese, Old Malay, or Sanskrit, the great scholarly and liturgical languages of the region's historical empires like Srivijaya and Majapahit. This has led to numerous theories about its origin and meaning. Some epigraphers have suggested it could be a form of Old Javanese Kawi script, while others see parallels with early Tamil or even a unique local variant. The problem is that while the characters look familiar, they don't quite match any known script perfectly. It's like recognizing the letters of an alphabet but finding that every word is misspelled, a feeling that the message is almost within reach but remains just beyond understanding. This has sparked a fascinating debate. Does the inscription represent a known language written in a slightly idiosyncratic or poorly executed hand by a local carver? Or does it represent a completely unknown script, perhaps one used by a small, localized kingdom or trading post that has since vanished from the historical record without a trace? The location of the stone is a critical clue. Singapore sat at the crossroads of ancient maritime trade routes, a melting pot where Malay, Chinese, Indian, and Javanese cultures and languages intersected. It is entirely plausible that a unique Creole language or a localized writing system developed there to facilitate trade and administration, a system of which the Singapore stone is the only surviving physical evidence. Attempts at decipherment have been hampered by the same dual problem that plagues so many of these mysteries: a lack of comparable material and the absence of a bilingual text. With only a few lines of text surviving on the fragment, scholars cannot perform the statistical analysis of character frequency and combination that is essential for cracking an unknown code. The inscription might be a royal proclamation, a merchant's contract, a religious dedication, or a boundary marker without more context. We simply cannot know. The destruction of the full slab means we lost the potential repetition, the grammatical patterns, and the full scope of the text that might have provided the key. The Singapore stone fragment is a ghost of a language, a whisper of a community that once thrived on that very shore, its voice reduced to a beautiful, silent, and enduring puzzle. Yet, even as we grapple with the ghosts of languages from great empires, a discovery from a small village in Romania has ignited a firestorm of debate that challenges the very timeline of writing's invention. This brings us to the Tartaria tablets, three small, unfired clay objects found in 1961, buried in a ritual pit alongside cremated bones. Their discovery near the village of Tartaria would have been a modest archaeological note were it not for the symbols scratched onto their surfaces, a series of angular, rune-like marks that some researchers boldly claimed pushed the invention of writing back by over 2,000 years, dating them to an astonishing 5300 before the Common Era. If true, this would mean a sophisticated writing system existed in the Balkan centuries before the very first cuneiform emerged in Mesopotamia, a claim so revolutionary it would force us to rewrite history itself. The tablets themselves are humble. Two are rectangular and one is disc-shaped, each small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. The symbols are not pictographic like early Sumerian script. They are abstract, composed of straight lines and angles arranged in seemingly deliberate rows and groupings. To proponents of their status as writing, these aren't random scratches. They point to the clear organization of the signs, their repetition across the different tablets, and their deposition in what appears to be a sacred context as evidence of intentional, meaningful communication. The most dramatic theory, proposed by the archaeologist Marija Gimbutas, linked the symbols to the Vinca culture, a Neolithic society that flourished across southeastern Europe. She argued the tablets were part of a larger system of Old European script, a precursor to later writing that was eventually extinguished by the migrations of Indo-European peoples. This narrative is powerfully appealing, suggesting an advanced matrifocal society in ancient Europe that possessed a technology we never knew existed. However, the vast majority of mainstream archaeologists and linguists remain deeply and profoundly skeptical. The criticisms are methodical and multifaceted. The first and largest problem is one of context. The tablets were not found in a secure, clearly dated layer of an undisturbed settlement. They were found in a pit, and the dating of 5300 before the Common Era is extrapolated from associated objects, not from the tablets themselves. This opens the possibility that they are much younger objects that ended up in an older context, a common issue in archaeology that makes their proposed age far from certain. The second, and perhaps most decisive, argument against them being true writing is the complete and total lack of a corpus. In the entire Vinca culture, across hundreds of sites and thousands of excavated artifacts, we have nothing else like them. We have plenty of artifacts with single, isolated symbols, often called Vinca symbols, but these are typically just one mark on a pot or figurine, likely denoting ownership or a maker's marker, a far cry from a structured sequence of signs meant to record language. The Tartaria tablets stand in utter isolation. If this was a true writing system, even an early one, we would expect to find more examples. We would expect to see evolution, variation, mistakes on practice tablets, and a gradual increase in complexity over time. We see none of that. The silence is deafening. This leads most scholars to a more conservative and arguably more plausible conclusion. The marks on the Tartaria tablets are likely just that, marks. They could be a form of proto-writing, meaningful symbols perhaps representing a personal name, a religious dedication, or a tally of goods, but not a full system capable of recording spoken language. They might be the elaborate signature of a powerful individual, a sacred shaman symbols, or a ritual notation understood only by a select few. They are a fascinating and important glimpse into the symbolic mind of Neolithic Europeans, but they are not a library. The intense debate surrounding them is a perfect example of how a single, ambiguous find can capture our imagination, forcing a rigorous and necessary conversation about what truly constitutes writing, and reminding us that the line between meaningful symbol and recorded language is often frustratingly and fascinatingly blurred. Yet, just as the Tartaria tablets challenge the origins of writing in Europe, a peculiar book discovered in a Hungarian library presents a mystery from a much more recent era, wrapped in the trappings of faith and deception. Found in the early 19th century in the city of Rohank, in what was then the Kingdom of Hungary, this volume is known as the Rohank Codex. It is a small, unassuming book. It's 448 pages made of fragile vellum, but its contents are anything but ordinary. Every single page is filled from edge to edge with a script unlike any other seen before or since, a strange, dense, and bewildering collection of unknown characters. And it is not just text. The codex is lavishly illustrated with delicate drawings that depict scenes of war, religious rituals, and daily life, all rendered with a curious blend of artistic styles that has only deepened the enigma surrounding its origins. The writing system itself is the first great puzzle. It consists of just under 200 unique signs, a mix of simple geometric shapes and more complex, almost runic symbols. To a casual observer, it might look vaguely familiar, perhaps reminiscent of old Hungarian runes or some forms of Germanic script, but upon closer inspection, it matches nothing in the historical record. The text is written from right to left, and while some characters appear frequently, others are used only once or twice, a pattern that suggests a fully developed writing system rather than a random invention. The most baffling linguistic analysis, however, comes from the text's apparent redundancy. Some researchers have calculated that the codex displays a level of repetition and internal structure that is far higher than most natural languages, almost as if it were overly systematic, a characteristic that has fueled intense debate about its authenticity from the very beginning. This debate is thrown into even sharper relief by the codex's bizarre and anachronistic illustrations. The images are a chaotic fusion of religious iconography drawn from across continents and centuries. You can clearly see Christian symbolism, Jesus on the cross, the Virgin Mary, and figures that look like Catholic bishops. but right alongside them are what appear to be Muslim soldiers wearing turbans, pagan sun and moon symbols, and scenes of warfare involving soldiers with shields and spears. This wild mixture makes it impossible to confidently place the book within a specific cultural or religious context. It feels both ancient and modern, Eastern and Western, sacred and profane all at once. This visual confusion is a major reason why the codex is so difficult to date. Estimates for its creation range from the 16th century all the way back to the medieval period, though modern analysis of the ink and vellum suggests an origin around the 1500s. This combination of an unreadable script and mixed-up imagery has naturally led to a wide spectrum of theories, with most opinions falling into one of two camps. The first believes the Voynich Codex is a genuine, albeit bizarre, artifact of history. Proponents of this view suggest it could be the work of an isolated religious sect, perhaps one that syncretized beliefs from Christianity, Islam, and local pagan traditions, creating their own secret liturgy and writing system to protect their beliefs from outside persecution. Others have proposed it was created as an encrypted document, a cipher meant to hide sensitive political or religious information during a time of great turmoil in Central Europe, such as the Ottoman invasions. The second, and increasingly popular, theory is that the entire book is an incredibly elaborate and sophisticated hoax, crafted in the late 18th or early 19th century. The motive: to create a sensation, to dupe a wealthy collector, or perhaps as an intricate intellectual prank. Those who argue for a hoax point directly to the text's unusual statistical properties and the contradictory illustrations as evidence of a deliberate attempt to create something that looks like a language without actually being one. The most famous proposed solution to the codex comes from this perspective. In 2018, linguists Gabor Tokaj and Levent Zoltan Karolyi claimed to have cracked it, arguing that the text is not a language at all but a clever cipher based on a distorted form of Hungarian, mixed with Latin and German words, and that the content is largely a retelling of stories from the Old Testament. However, their decipherment has been met with significant skepticism, as their method involved a great deal of subjective interpretation and has not been successfully applied to translate large, continuous sections of the text in a verifiable way. The Voynich Codex therefore exists in a frustrating limbo. It lacks the ancient pedigree of a linear or an Indus Valley Script, making its potential historical value harder to define. Yet its physical reality as a handmade book, filled with hundreds of pages of careful script and art, demands an explanation. It is either a priceless relic of a forgotten chapter of religious history or one of the most audacious and complex forgeries ever created, a work of such dedication that its creator somehow resisted leaving behind a single clue to their deception. It sits in the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, not as a silent sentinel from a lost civilization, but as a beautiful, maddening question mark from the more recent past, challenging us to decide if we are looking at a work of devout faith, an act of brilliant cryptography, or simply a stunningly executed lie. While the Tartaria tablets present a contested European claim to early writing, an even older and more fundamental mystery emerges from the other side of the world. To find it, we must travel back to a time before the pyramids of Egypt, before the first cities of Mesopotamia, to a small Neolithic village in the valley of the Yellow River in China. Here, at a site called Jiahu, archaeologists uncovered something that would ignite a fierce debate about the very dawn of human communication. Buried in graves alongside flutes made from bird bone and evidence of some of the world's earliest fermented beverages were a series of tortoise shells. These were not simple food remains, they were purposefully selected carapaces, and on them were carefully incised a series of 11 distinct markings. These humble etchings, dating to an almost unimaginable 6,600 years before the Common Era, are known as the Jiahu symbols, and they represent the oldest known complex markings of their kind in the world. The symbols themselves are abstract yet deliberate, Some look like the eye of a needle, others resemble a small grid or a window pane. There are marks that bring to mind the Roman numeral 8 and others that are simple, intersecting lines. What makes them so captivating is not their visual complexity, but their profound age and their context. They were found in a ritual burial context placed near the deceased, suggesting they held a significance that went beyond simple decoration or casual doodling. For some researchers, this combination of factors is powerfully suggestive. They argue that these markings could represent the very first stumbling steps toward a full writing system in East Asia, a precursor that would eventually evolve millennia later into the complex characters of Chinese script. The idea is incredibly compelling, a direct line drawn from these ancient shells to the modern written word, a genesis of literacy that began not with kings and scribes, but with Neolithic shamans and their rituals. However, the overwhelming consensus among linguists and most archaeologists is far more cautious. The primary reason for this skepticism is a fundamental principle in the study of writing's evolution: the critical difference between proto-writing and true writing. Proto-writing refers to the use of symbols to convey limited information. This can include property marks, ritual symbols, numerical tallies, or mnemonic devices to help a storyteller remember a sequence. True writing, on the other hand, is a graphic representation of a specific spoken language. It has a direct phonetic component, allowing it to record not just things or numbers, but any word or thought that can be spoken, from a person's name to a philosophical idea. The Jiahu symbols, in the eyes of most experts, fall firmly into the first category. The evidence for this view is strong. The first and most obvious problem is the sheer isolation of the find. We have a handful of symbols on a handful of shells from a single site, and then nothing else for thousands of years. If this was the beginning of a true writing system, we would expect to see it grow, evolve, and spread. We would find more examples with more signs, showing increasing complexity over time at other contemporary sites. Instead, the trail goes completely cold. There is no continuous archaeological record linking these scratches to the later, sophisticated oracle bone script of the Shang dynasty, which appears over 5,000 years later. This enormous gap suggests that whatever meaning the Jiahu symbols held was likely lost even to the people who came shortly after, a localized tradition that flourished and then died out without direct descendants. Furthermore, the symbols themselves lack the variety and combinatorial structure of a true script. With only 11 distinct signs, the capacity for expressing complex, novel ideas is severely limited. They are not arranged in any discernible, repeating linear sequence that would suggest a syntactic structure. They appear more as individual, isolated marks. It is far more plausible that each symbol represented a specific, standalone concept, perhaps a clan insignia, a ritual designation, a number, or a token in a divination practice. They could have been a form of ownership marking for a powerful family or a shaman's signature, a way of saying, "This sacred object belongs to me," or "This ritual was performed by our group." They communicated information, absolutely, but they did not transcribe speech. This does not diminish their incredible importance. The Jiahu symbols are a window into the cognitive leap our ancestors were making. They show a human mind moving beyond the representation of a single object in a painting, like a drawing of a bison on a cave wall, toward the abstraction of an idea into a symbol. This is the foundational principle upon which all writing is built. The people of Jaya who were experimenting with the power of the symbol, learning that a simple, carved line could stand for something much larger and more complex than itself. They were playing with the very building blocks that would one day be assembled into literature, law, and history. Their work was not the finished cathedral of language, but the careful quarrying of the very first stones. They remind us that the journey to writing was not a single brilliant invention, but a slow cultural evolution, beginning with these small, mysterious, and powerful marks on a tortoise shell, a silent testament to the human desire to make a mark that lasts. Deep within the mud of a lakeshore in northern Greece, a discovery was made that would push the boundaries of our understanding of writing's timeline in Europe even further than the Tartaria tablets. This is the Dispilio tablet, a fragment of wood bearing a series of carefully carved linear symbols unearthed from a Neolithic lakeside settlement. Its significance lies not just in what is written on it, but in its astonishing age. Radiocarbon dating of the wood places its creation at around 5,200 years before the Common Era. This makes it a contemporary of the very earliest stages of the Vinca culture, and crucially, far older than the first known writing systems of Mesopotamia. If its markings are indeed a form of proto-writing, it suggests the desire to record information symbolically was emerging independently in multiple parts of the world at the dawn of the agricultural age. The tablet itself was found waterlogged, preserved by the very same anaerobic conditions that have saved so many wooden artifacts from total decay. The symbols are arranged in a loose, horizontal line, and they possess a structured, deliberate appearance that distinguishes them from random decorative notches. They are abstract, consisting of straight and angular lines that some researchers have compared to later Greek letters, though any direct connection is purely speculative. The immediate challenge with an artifact of this age and material is establishing a definitive date. While the piece of wood itself has been dated, the critical question is whether the carving on its surface is contemporary with the wood's creation. It is theoretically possible, though highly unlikely given the context of its discovery deep within the archaeological layer of the settlement, that the symbols were added much later, long after the wood was already ancient. Most archaeologists, however, accept that the carving is original, making this piece of spruce a breathtakingly ancient candidate for a written document. The true obstacle to understanding the Dispilio tablet is the same one that plagues the Tartaria find, a complete and utter lack of comparative material. This isn't just a fragment of a larger text, it is the only object of its kind ever found at the site or in the wider region from that era. We have no other examples to compare it to, no statistical pattern of sign used to analyze, and no evolution of the script to study. It is a single sentence from a lost language, or perhaps just a single word. Without more examples, decipherment isn't just difficult, it's functionally impossible. We cannot know if the marks represent numbers, a owner's name, a spiritual invocation, or a notation related to the calendar or trade. It stands in silent isolation, a powerful clue without a context. This profound isolation forces us to ask a very fundamental question about the nature of writing itself. Discoveries like the Dispilio tablet challenge the traditional, linear narrative that writing was invented once in Mesopotamia and then diffused outward to the rest of the world. Instead, they suggest a more complex and fascinating reality, that the cognitive leap toward using symbols to represent information may have occurred multiple times in multiple places as human societies reached a certain level of complexity. The people of Dispilio were farmers and herdsmen, living in a large, organized stilt house community over a lake. They had pottery, tools, and a structured social life. The invention of a symbolic notation system, perhaps to track resources, mark ownership, or record rituals, would have been a natural tool for such a community. The tablet may not be writing as we define it today, but it is powerful evidence of the human mind's universal drive to move beyond the spoken word and create a record that could outlast its speaker. It represents a spark of innovation that, for reasons lost to time, failed to catch fire and spread, leaving behind this one charred ember as proof that it once briefly glowed. High in the remote and rugged Rhodope mountains of Bulgaria, a different kind of enigma is carved directly into the living rock. This is the Sutovo inscription, a collection of stark, angular symbols etched into a vertical sandstone cliff face, standing as a silent and solitary sentinel to a past that remains stubbornly opaque. Unlike the portable tablets of Tartaria or the ritual shells of Jaya, this message is permanently anchored to its landscape, suggesting it was meant to be a public declaration, a landmark for all who passed by to see. Yet for all its public placement, its meaning is profoundly private, a secret kept for over 2 millennia. The script itself is visually striking and completely unique. It consists of roughly 8 to 10 lines of text, though erosion has made an exact count difficult. The characters are deeply incised, composed of straight lines, zigzags, and geometric shapes like triangles and circles with internal dots. They don't resemble the graceful curves of Greek or the familiar blocks of Latin. To a modern eye, they might look vaguely runic or even reminiscent of some ancient Anatolian scripts, but they don't match any known writing system with certainty. This visual isolation is the first major hurdle. Without a sister script for comparison, epigraphers are essentially starting from zero, with no phonetic values to assign and no grammatical rules to deduce. This has naturally led to a fierce debate about its origins. The most prominent theory, and the one that captures the local imagination, links the inscription to the ancient Thracians. The Thracians were a powerful and culturally rich Indo-European people who inhabited the Balkans, known to their Greek neighbors as fierce warriors and followers of mystical cults. They were, by all accounts, a sophisticated society, yet they left behind no deciphered written records of their own. The Sutovo inscription, located deep within their historical territory, is a prime candidate to be that elusive Thracian script. If proven, it would be a revolutionary key to understanding a people whose history has been written almost entirely by their Greek and Roman adversaries. Proponents of this theory point to the discovery of a nearby ancient fortress and other Thracian archaeological sites in the region as contextual evidence that this was a place of significance. However, a compelling counterargument suggests a much later origin. Some scholars note a potential, if faint, resemblance between the Sutovo symbols and the Glagolitic alphabet, the oldest known Slavic script invented by the monks Cyril and Methodius in the 9th century. Could this be an early, crude experiment with the new writing system, or a pagan response to the Christianizing mission, a last stand of old beliefs recorded in a new form? Alternatively, others have proposed it could be a form of late Greek cursive or even a cryptic medieval property marker. The problem is that the inscription's severe weathering makes precise paleographic analysis nearly impossible, allowing these competing theories to persist without a clear winner. This brings us to the central tragedy of the Sutovo inscription, the relentless erosion of time. Sandstone is a soft and porous rock, vulnerable to wind, rain, and freeze-thaw cycles. Over centuries, the once crisp lines of the carving have softened and blurred. In several places, entire characters have become little more than faint, unreadable shadows. This physical degradation is a catastrophic loss of data. In decipherment, even a single clear character can be a crucial clue. The loss of multiple symbols can render a text permanently incomprehensible. The erosion hasn't just made the inscription hard to read, it has actively destroyed the evidence needed to read it at all. Consequently, every attempt at translation has been speculative and controversial. The most famous effort was made by the Bulgarian archaeologist Alexander Fall in the 1970s. After studying the inscription, he proposed a dramatic translation that read, "I, priest of the Thracian god Orpheus, brought to life the one who was dead." This translation, linking the text directly to the mythical cult of Orpheus and his legendary ability to descend into the underworld, was incredibly alluring. It painted a picture of a sacred site, a place of powerful ritual and resurrection. Unfortunately, Fall's methods were criticized by other linguists for being overly interpretive and for relying on assumptions about Thracian language that simply cannot be verified. Without a bilingual text or a much larger corpus of Thracian writing, his translation remains a captivating story rather than an accepted fact. The Sutovo inscription therefore exists in a state of perpetual ambiguity. It is a monument that refuses to divulge its secret. It could be a profound religious text from a lost civilization, a mundane boundary marker, or something entirely different. Its power lies not in what we know, but in what we don't. It represents every unanswered question we have about the ancient world, carved in stone on a mountainside, a permanent reminder that history is not always written in a language we can understand, and that some messages from the past are meant to be felt as much as they are to be read. While the civilizations of Europe and the Americas were experimenting with the very concept of writing, a mighty empire rising in the heart of the ancient world was facing a profound bureaucratic challenge of its own. This was the Kushan Empire, a powerhouse that emerged in the first centuries of the Common Era, controlling the vital Silk Road trade routes that connected the Roman Empire in the west to Han China in the east. From their heartland in Bactria, in what is now northern Afghanistan and parts of Central Asia, the Kushan rulers presided over a spectacularly diverse and multicultural realm, a crossroads where Greek art, Persian religion, Indian Buddhism, and nomadic steppe traditions fused into a unique and vibrant culture. And it is here, amidst this melting pot, that we find evidence of a language experiment that flickered into existence and then vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only the faintest of traces. This evidence comes to us in the form of a handful of inscriptions, most famously those found at the ancient site of Dasht-e-Navar in Afghanistan and on a handful of coins. The script itself is a beautiful and enigmatic creation. At a glance, it looks familiar. It uses modified Greek letters, a legacy of Alexander the Great's conquests that left a Hellenistic cultural layer across Central Asia. But a closer look reveals something is deeply unusual. Interspersed among these Greek characters are a series of completely unknown, non-Greek symbols. These additional signs aren't random scribbles, they are consistent across different inscriptions, suggesting they are part of a formal, organized system. It appears the Kushan scribes took the Greek alphabet they had inherited and attempted to adapt it, adding new letters to represent sounds that didn't exist in the Greek language. They were essentially creating a custom-fit writing system, and the language they were almost certainly trying to record was their own, Bactrian and Eastern Iranian tongue. This makes the unknown Kushan script a potential missing link in a fascinating linguistic story. We know that the Kushans eventually abandoned this hybrid system and switched to using the Greek alphabet exclusively for writing Bactrian, a practice that worked well enough for centuries. The later Bactrian language, written in pure Greek script, is largely understood by scholars today. So the existence of this earlier, experimental script raises a tantalizing question. Why go to the trouble of inventing new letters if the standard Greek alphabet was sufficient? The most likely answer is accuracy. The Kushan scribes, in their first attempts to write their native tongue, likely found that Greek lacked the precise characters to capture certain critical sounds in Bactrian. Those mysterious extra symbols were probably invented to represent these unique phonemes, creating a more precise and elegant way of writing before the simpler, if less accurate, method of using standard Greek letters won out for reasons of convenience or political change. The tragedy, and the reason this script remains undeciphered, is the devastating lack of material. Only a few short inscriptions survive, primarily on rock faces and a limited number of coins. There is no lengthy text, no royal proclamation, no bilingual dictionary. Without a longer sample of text, linguists cannot perform the statistical analysis on letter frequency and word patterns that is essential for cracking a code. It's like having a handful of words from a vast and complex language. You might guess the meaning of one or two, but you'll never grasp the grammar or the full vocabulary. The script is a ghost, a brief and brilliant innovation that was apparently deemed unnecessary almost as soon as it was conceived. Its purpose superseded by a more practical tool, and its secrets lost when the last scribe who understood it put down his stylus for the final time. However, to witness a writing system in its full pictorial glory, a living tapestry of history and myth, we must turn our gaze to the mountainous regions of Oaxaca, Mexico, and the extraordinary legacy of the Mixtec people. Flourishing between the 10th and 16th centuries, the Mixtecs were known as the Cloud People, renowned for their exquisite gold work, intricate polychrome ceramics, and sophisticated historical consciousness. Theirs was not an empire of towering pyramids like the Maya, but of powerful, competing city-states, each ruled by a divine lord who traced their lineage back to the dawn of time. And it is this deep, abiding need to record genealogy and royal right that found its ultimate expression in their unique writing system, a breathtaking fusion of art and language that we can partially see but not yet fully hear. Mixtec writing is a masterpiece of the pictorial. Unlike the logosyllabic systems of the Maya or the potential alphabetic experiments of the Old World, the Mixtec system is overwhelmingly logographic. It tells its stories not through the sounds of words but through a direct vocabulary of images. A beautifully rendered jaguar pelt means jaguar, a flinted knife means sacrifice, a place sign depicting a hill with a specific flower or animal emerging from it represents an entire town. The system's genius lies in its combinatory power. These symbols aren't just static pictures, they are combined in inventive ways to create more complex ideas. To write the name of the famous ruler 8-deer jaguar claw, a scribe would not spell it out phonetically. Instead, they would paint the numeral 8 next to the glyph for a deer's head, and then combine the symbols for a jaguar and a claw. The name is a visual poem, an immediate portrait of its bearer. This is precisely why we can understand so much of the structure of Mixtec writing while remaining largely ignorant of its finer linguistic details. The content of the major screenfold books or codices, like the Codex Zouch-Nuttall or the Codex Vindobonensis, is unmistakably historical and genealogical. We can follow the narratives with remarkable clarity. We see births, marriages, military conquests, and ritual bloodletting ceremonies. We watch the dramatic life of 8-deer unfold across pages, from his rise to power to his eventual capture and execution. We can identify the players, the locations, and the actions because the art is so explicit. A figure seated on a jaguar pelt throne is clearly a ruler. A temple with a curled, smoking volute represents a place of ritual. A couple connected by a red umbilical cord signifies a marriage alliance. The profound challenge, the aspect that keeps this language largely undeciphered, lies in everything that is not drawn. The symbols tell us the what, but they leave out the how and the why. The rich, spoken narrative that would have accompanied the reading of these codices is almost entirely lost. The painted glyph for conquest might show a temple with a cracked and toppled summit, but the oral account would have detailed the strategies, the speeches, the names of the specific warriors, the omens that preceded the battle, the entire epic poem that brings a static image to life. This means that while we can read the plot summary of a Mixtec history, we have lost the actual novel. We know that 8-deer attacked a certain town, but we don't know the words he used to rally his troops. We see that a marriage took place, but we don't know the political negotiations or the poetic phrases spoken during the ceremony. Furthermore, the system's heavy reliance on logograms makes it incredibly difficult to access the actual Mixtec language itself. Without a strong phonetic component, signs that represent sounds rather than things, it is nearly impossible to reconstruct the specific words, grammar, and syntax the Mixtecs used. A few phonetic clues do exist, primarily in the form of symbolic puns or rebuse writing, where a word that sounds like another is used to represent it. But these are rare gems in a vast artistic landscape. The result is that we are like art historians analyzing a silent film. We can describe the scenes, the characters, and the action in incredible detail, but we cannot hear the dialogue, the music, or the narrator's voice. The Mixtec codices are a library of history painted in the most vibrant colors, a testament to a people's deep desire to be remembered. their stories waiting for the day we learn to listen to the silence between the brushstrokes. But even as the Mixtec system flourished, its roots stretch back to a far older and more foundational tradition, one that first gave Mesoamerica its written voice. To find this origin, we travel to the highlands of Oaxaca, to the magnificent ancient city of Monte Albán, a sprawling complex of grand plazas, imposing pyramids, and cryptic stone monuments overlooking the entire valley. It was here, with the Zapotec people, that one of the very first pens, or rather, chisels, was put to stone in the Americas. Emerging around 500 years before the Common Era, Zapotec writing represents a pioneering leap, a bold experiment in capturing language that would set the template for all the complex scripts that followed in the region. The evidence of this ingenuity is carved into stone monuments known as danzantes and stelae. The earliest examples, the so-called danzantes, feature contorted figures that may represent slain enemies or sacrificial victims, often accompanied by a few short glyphs. But the system rapidly evolved into something far more sophisticated. Soon, upright stone slab stelae were being erected, bearing longer inscriptions that combined calendrical dates with historical events and the names of rulers. The glyphs themselves are a captivating blend of the realistic and the abstract. You can clearly make out human heads in profile, animals like jaguars and birds, and elements from the natural world. But you also see more symbolic geometric shapes, bars and dots for numbers, and intricate designs whose meanings are now obscure. This combination shows a script in a dynamic state of development, moving from pure pictorial representation toward a more symbolic and phonetic system capable of recording complex thought. A pivotal key to unlocking part of this system came from a shared Mesoamerican obsession: time. Like their Mayan neighbors to the east, the Zapotecs had a deeply ritualized and sophisticated calendar system. They used a two-part dating system on their monuments: the sacred round, a 260-day cycle comprised of a number from 1 to 13 paired with one of 20-day names, and the solar year known as the Pi, which was 365 days long. The bars and dots used for numbers were straightforward: a bar equaled 5, a dot equaled 1. More importantly, the glyphs for the 20-day names have been largely deciphered through careful comparison with later, better understood calendars from other cultures. This means we can often read the precise dates recorded on a Zapotec monument. We know, for instance, that a certain stela was erected on a day like 5 earthquake or 12 wind. This was a monumental breakthrough, providing a fixed chronological framework for Zapotec history. Yet, this very success highlights the profound frustration that defines Zapotec decipherment today. We can read the when, but we consistently fail to understand the what. The historical narratives remain a stubborn mystery. A typical inscription might begin with a clear calendrical date, followed by a string of additional glyphs that almost certainly name a ruler, describe an action like ascended to the throne or conquered a city, and identify the place where it happened. We can sometimes make educated guesses. A glyph showing a hill with a peculiar top knot might be the emblem for Monte Albán itself. A footprint might signify a journey or a conquest, and a descending figure could represent a death. But these are interpretations based on context and comparison, not confirmed translations. The core of the language, its grammar and syntax, the specific words being used, remains locked away. It's like having a history book where all the chapter headings and dates are clear, but every single sentence of the actual story has been redacted. The primary obstacle is the language barrier itself. Zapotec is not a dead language. Hundreds of thousands of people in Oaxaca still speak its modern descendants. The problem is the immense gulf between that modern spoken language and the ancient written form. Languages evolve dramatically over 2,500 years. Sounds shift, word meanings change, and grammar transforms. Imagine trying to understand a complex Old English text using only your knowledge of modern English without any training or a Rosetta Stone. The connection is there, but the differences are overwhelming. Furthermore, ancient Zapotec writing appears to have been highly abbreviated and context-dependent, likely serving as a mnemonic aid for professional scribes who would then elaborate the full story orally. The stone carvings are the bullet points of history, not the full transcript. Without that living scribbled tradition which was lost long ago, we are left with cryptic notes for a speech we never got to hear. The silent stones of Monte Alban stand as a testament to a brilliant beginning, a foundational script that taught Mesoamerica how to write, yet one that still guards the intimate details of its own powerful and compelling story. Moving from the sun-drenched ruins of the Mediterranean to the misty, vineyard-covered hills of northeastern Italy, we encounter a script that feels both intimately familiar and profoundly alien. This is the world of the Veneti, an ancient people who thrived in what is now the Veneto and Istrian regions, a culture renowned for their skilled horse breeding and their strategic position as a bridge between the Etruscan, Celtic, and Greek worlds. Their legacy to us is a collection of roughly 400 inscriptions, written in a script we can read with ease, yet the language it records remains one of Europe's most stubborn linguistic puzzles. This is Istrian Venetic, a testament to the fact that sometimes being able to pronounce the words is only the very first step on a much longer road to understanding. The key that unlocked the script was ironically borrowed from their neighbors. The Veneti didn't invent their own writing system from scratch. They adapted the alphabet of the powerful Etruscan civilization to their west. They took the Etruscan characters and modified them slightly to suit their own needs, creating a distinctive North Italic script. Because we understand the Etruscan alphabet, epigraphers can confidently assign sound values to almost every Venetic character. There's no mystery in the script itself. We can look at an inscription on a bronze votive plaque or a funerary stele and accurately sound out the words. We can hear the phonetics of a language not spoken for over 2 millennia. But this is where the victory ends and the real detective work begins, because pronouncing the words is meaningless if you don't know what they mean. The primary obstacle is the nature of the texts themselves. The vast majority of Venetic inscriptions are incredibly short and frustratingly formulaic. They are epitaphs on graves, stating little more than the name of the deceased and their father's name. Others are brief dedications on votive offerings, perhaps a name and the god it was dedicated to. Imagine trying to learn modern English, but your only textbooks are the engraved inscriptions on tombstones in a cemetery. You would quickly learn common names and the phrase, "here lies," but you would have no access to verbs, adjectives, or the complex grammar needed to form a single complex sentence. This is the precise dilemma facing linguists. The Venetic corpus gives us a wonderful dictionary of names and a few likely divine names, like the goddess Reisha, who was often associated with writing and healing, but it provides only the faintest whispers of the living language's structure and vocabulary. This scarcity of data fuels a heated debate about the language's very identity. Where does Venetic fit in the family tree of ancient tongues? The most prominent theory, supported by some compelling evidence, places it within the Italic branch of the Indo-European language family. This would make it a relative, though not a direct ancestor, of Latin. Scholars pointing to this connection highlight specific grammatical endings on words that look remarkably similar to early Latin case endings, suggesting a shared ancestral root. Other researchers, however, hear different echoes in the phonetics. They argue that Venetic shows intriguing similarities to the Celtic languages spoken to the north or even to the Illyrian languages across the Adriatic Sea. And then there are those who propose it could be a separate, isolated branch of Indo-European altogether, a unique survivor of a much older linguistic layer in Europe that was later absorbed by the spread of Latin. Without a longer narrative text, a royal proclamation, a legal code, or a fragment of poetry, these theories remain in a state of suspended animation. A single, substantial bilingual text, a Venetic Rosetta Stone, would instantly resolve the argument, but no such artifact has ever been found. The Romans, who eventually absorbed the Venetic territories, were thorough in their cultural assimilation, and the Venetic language faded into history, leaving behind these brief, stone-cut messages that are like overhearing the first few words of a conversation that was then abruptly silenced. These inscriptions are the name tags of a lost civilization, elegant and clear, yet they tell us nothing of the stories they told, the laws they upheld, or the songs they sang. Scattered across the vast, sun-scorched expanse of North Africa, from the Atlantic coast of Morocco to the deserts of Libya, lies evidence of a script that echoes the resilience of the region's earliest cultures. Carved into rocky outcrops and towering boulders that have witnessed millennia of Saharan caravans, these inscriptions are the silent voices of the ancient Berber peoples. This is the Libico-Berber script, an elegant and angular writing system whose origins are as shrouded in mystery as the desert sands that have long threatened to erase it from history. The timeline of this script is itself a subject of intense debate. The most conservative estimates place its earliest appearances around the 2nd century before the Common Era, based on inscriptions found in proximity to known Carthaginian and Roman settlements. However, bolder theories, supported by stylistic analysis and vague references in classical texts, push that date back much further, possibly to the 1st millennium before the Common Era. If these earlier dates hold true, it would mean the Libico-Berber script was developing concurrently with, or even predating, the arrival of the Phoenicians in North Africa, suggesting a potentially independent origin rather than one purely derived from outside influence. This script was not the tool of a single, centralized empire, but a flexible system used by a diverse confederation of tribes and kingdoms, from the formidable Numidians who challenged Rome to the nomadic Garamantes of the Fezzan. Its very persistence, used for over 1,000 years, speaks to its deep cultural importance as a marker of identity and a tool for communication across a vast and rugged landscape. Visually, the script is strikingly minimalist and geometric, perfectly suited for its primary medium, rock. The characters are composed of straight lines, dots, and simple shapes, circles, crosses, and angles, all rendered with an efficiency that suggests it was designed for clarity and ease of carving. You won't find the curvilinear flourishes of Latin or Greek here. This is a script born of the desert, practical and enduring. Its most distinctive feature is that it appears to be an abjad or a consonantal alphabet, much like its Phoenician cousin. This means the written words primarily, or exclusively, represent consonants, leaving the vowels to be filled in by the reader who already knows the spoken language. This was a common and effective approach for Semitic and Afro-Asiatic languages, to which the ancient Berber tongues belonged, but it creates a significant hurdle for modern decipherers trying to reconstruct words from a dead language. The most tantalizing clue to understanding this ancient system comes from its apparent modern descendant, Tifinagh. Used today by the Tuareg people, the legendary Blue Men of the Desert, to write their language of Tamashek, the modern Tifinagh script shares a clear and undeniable visual kinship with its ancient predecessor. Many of the characters are identical or bear a strong resemblance. This connection provides a powerful starting point, a potential bridge across 2,000 years. However, this bridge is far from complete. The modern Tifinagh script has been standardized and revised, and its usage has evolved. Furthermore, the Tuareg are just one branch of the broader Berber-speaking world. The language recorded in the ancient Libico-Berber inscriptions was likely an earlier form of a different Berber dialect, creating a linguistic gap to match the chronological one. We have the modern key, but we are trying to open a very ancient, very different lock. This leads to the core reason the earliest Libico-Berber inscriptions remain so stubbornly undeciphered. The problem is not a lack of inscriptions thousands have been documented, but a catastrophic lack of context. Unlike the situation with Egyptian hieroglyphs, there is no Libico-Berber Rosetta Stone. We have no extensive bilingual texts where a lengthy passage in a known language like Punic or Latin is paired with its translation in Libico-Berber. The few short bilinguals that do exist are funerary stelae from the Roman period, bearing little more than a name and a formulaic phrase like son of. These are invaluable for confirming the sound values of a handful of signs, but they are utterly useless for unlocking the grammar, vocabulary, and richer historical narratives we yearn for. They give us the letters to spell a few words, but not the dictionary to understand the language. Consequently, decipherment efforts have been painstakingly slow, advancing sign by isolated sign. Epigraphers use a multi-pronged approach. They analyze the direction of the writing, which is typically written horizontally from right to left or bottom to top. They study the frequency and positioning of certain signs to guess which might be vowels or word dividers. They look at the archaeological context of the inscriptions, hoping the imagery carved alongside them depictions of warriors, animals, or rituals might hint at the text's subject matter. And they constantly compare the signs to the modern Tifinagh alphabet, making careful, cautious proposals for phonetic values. It is a process of building a shaky ladder of inference, one fragile rung at a time, with no guarantee the next step will hold. The enduring silence of these stones is a profound loss. These are not merely graffiti or ownership marks. The length and prominence of many inscriptions suggest they recorded everything from royal proclamations and legal codes to epic poetry and religious dedications. They are the lost history of the formidable Numidian king Massinissa, who united the tribes and challenged Carthage. They are the treaties of his successor, Jugurtha, who waged a famous war against Rome. They are the myths, the laws, and the daily lives of a people who have been historically defined by everyone but themselves by their Egyptian, Carthaginian, Greek, and Roman neighbors. Each undeciphered inscription is a closed chapter in the story of North Africa, a story written by the indigenous peoples in their own hand, waiting for the day we finally learn how to read it. As our journey through the world's undeciphered scripts continues, we arrive on the sun-drenched Iberian Peninsula, where ancient cultures created a writing system so uniquely adapted to their needs that it continues to baffle and intrigue linguists to this day. This is the Southwest Paleo-Hispanic script, also known as Tartessian or South Lusitanian, a fascinating hybrid system that stands as a testament to the ingenuity of the people who lived in what is now southwestern Spain and Portugal over 2,500 years ago. Unlike the purely alphabetic systems we're familiar with, or the purely syllabic ones, this script occupies a mysterious middle ground, blending elements of both into a complex and beautiful written language that we can only partially understand. The story of this script begins with contact and cultural exchange. The Phoenicians, those master mariners and traders from the eastern Mediterranean, established colonies along the southern coast of Spain, such as Gadir, modern-day Cadiz. They brought with them their revolutionary consonantal alphabet, a system far simpler and more efficient than the complex scripts of Egypt or Mesopotamia. The indigenous people of the region, often collectively referred to as Tartessians after the semi-legendary kingdom of Tartessos, encountered this new technology and saw its potential. But instead of simply adopting it outright to write their own language, they performed a remarkable act of linguistic engineering. They took the Phoenician alphabet and fundamentally altered its nature to better suit the sounds and structures of their own pre-Indo-European tongue. They created something entirely new. This innovation is what makes the Southwest Paleo-Hispanic script so extraordinary and so difficult to decipher. It is what linguists call a semi-syllabary. This means that for some sounds, particularly the consonants, the signs work like letters in an alphabet, each representing a single consonant sound. But for other sounds, specifically the vowel-consonant combinations, the signs work as syllables representing a whole unit of sound like ta or b or ko. Imagine trying to read a text where some characters are like the letters in this sentence, but others are like entire syllables, and you have to know from context which function a sign is performing. This dual nature was likely a brilliant solution for efficiently representing the specific phonetic features of the local language, but for modern decipherers, it creates a labyrinth of possible interpretations for every single inscription. The script itself is also visually stunning. The characters are often described as jotty or geometric, with a distinctive appearance featuring straight lines, angles, and dots. They were primarily inscribed on stone, but examples also survive on pottery and precious metal objects, most notably the stunning gold jewelry from the treasure of El Carambolo. The inscriptions are typically written from right to left following the Phoenician tradition, and they vary greatly in length. Some are just a few signs, likely names or ownership marks, while others are longer texts that undoubtedly hold richer historical or ritual significance. And this brings us to the central frustration and the great unanswered question. What do these inscriptions actually say, despite being able to transliterate many of the signs, that is, to give them a phonetic value based on their Phoenician ancestors? We still cannot understand the language they are writing. We can often make the sounds, but the meaning evaporates into the ether. The language, likely a now vanished pre-Indo-European relic, has no known living relatives. It is another isolate, a ghost language with no sister tongues to provide clues or shared vocabulary. Without a bilingual text, a Southwest Paleo-Hispanic Rosetta Stone, the messages remain locked in their phonetic shell. The context of the inscriptions themselves offers only tantalizing hints. Many are found on funerary stelae, standing stones that marked graves. They often feature alongside carvings of warriors, horses, and chariots, suggesting they commemorate important individuals. It is heartbreaking to stand before one of these stones, to see the proud figure of a chieftain carved into the rock, to see the elegant script that surely tells his name, his lineage, and his great deeds, and to be completely unable to read it. These are not anonymous artifacts, they are deeply personal monuments, each one a specific individual's attempt to speak to the future, to say, "I was here." We can see them, but we cannot yet know them. The silent stones of ancient Iberia guard their stories well, a permanent reminder of the fragile thread that connects us to the voices of the past. Moving from the geometric inscriptions of Iberia to the vast steppes of Inner Asia, we encounter a script born not from gradual evolution, but from a single, deliberate act of imperial will. This is the Khitan Large Script, a writing system commissioned in the 10th century by the founding emperor of the Liao dynasty, Yelu Abaoji, for his Khitan people. The Khitans were a powerful nomadic confederation who conquered and ruled over vast territories of northern China and Mongolia, and like many conquerors before them, they faced a critical challenge of governance: how to administer a sprawling, multi-ethnic empire without a unified written language. Their solution was to invent one from the ground up, but with a fascinating and ultimately confounding twist. They didn't seek simplicity and efficiency. They pursued something far more profound in their eyes: prestige and cultural independence. The Khitans were caught between two towering literary traditions. To their south was China, with its immensely sophisticated and ancient logographic system, a script that was a potent symbol of bureaucratic power and high civilization. To their west and in their past were various Turkic peoples who used runic alphabets. Emperor Abaoji wanted something truly his own, a script that would visually proclaim the Khitans as equals to the great Chinese dynasties, not mere imitators. He tasked his court scholar, Yelu Chulubu, with this monumental project, and the result was the Khitan Large Script. As the name implies, it was a large, imposing system, and it was overwhelmingly logographic, directly inspired by Chinese characters in its appearance and fundamental principle. A Khitan Large character is a complex unit, often composed of several strokes arranged in a square block, looking to the untrained eye almost identical to a Chinese Hanzi. This was a conscious political and cultural statement etched in ink and stone. We are an imperial power on par with the Song dynasty, but herein lies the first layer of the decipherment puzzle. While the Khitan large script looks Chinese, it does not act Chinese. The Khitan language was completely unrelated to Chinese. It was a Mongolic tongue with a different grammar, sound system, and word structure. The Chinese writing system works for the Chinese language because, over millennia, a deep and intricate connection developed between the spoken word and the written character. The Khitans attempted to shortcut this entire process. They borrowed the visual form of Chinese characters but used them to write words in their own, entirely different language. This means that while a Khitan character might look exactly like the Chinese character for horse, it could actually be representing the Khitan word for river, or a sound, or a grammatical particle. The visual similarity is a magnificent red herring, a trap for any decipherer who assumes that form implies function. This deliberate complexity was a feature, not a bug. The script was designed to be learned by a small, elite class of Khitan bureaucrats and scribes. Its difficulty was a barrier to entry, safeguarding Khitan state secrets and administrative control from the millions of Chinese subjects they now rule. It was a tool of power reserved for the inner circle. We know the system also included a phonetic component, with some characters likely used for their sound rather than their meaning, but untangling which characters are logograms and which are phonograms is a monumental task without a clear key. And that key is precisely what we lack. The greatest obstacle to cracking the Khitan large script is the same one that has doomed so many other linguistic puzzles: the catastrophic loss of context. The Liao dynasty fell in the 12th century, and their successors, most notably the Mongols of Genghis Khan, had little use for their writing system. The knowledge of how to read it faded into history, while a surprising number of inscriptions survive. On stone monuments, metal mirrors, and buried epigraphs, they are almost all frustratingly brief and formulaic. The longest texts are memorial inscriptions on grandiose tombs, which typically begin with fixed, ceremonial phrasing before listing the achievements and titles of the deceased. These are the equivalent of trying to learn English solely from the text on mausoleums. You'll learn a lot of words like "here lies," "beloved father," and "emperor," but you'll never grasp the full, living language. Progress has been made, but it is painstakingly slow and controversial. The primary strategy has been the comparative method, using what little we know of related Mongolic languages, like the much later medieval Mongolian, of the secret history of the Mongols to make educated guesses. If a certain character appears repeatedly in a context where you'd expect a name or a title, scholars can make a hypothesis. They have successfully identified the Khitan words for emperor, year, and a handful of numerals. The discovery of a few short bilingual Chinese Khitan inscriptions provided a few more precious pieces of the puzzle, like finding a single page of a phrasebook. But these are tiny flashes of light in an immense darkness. They confirm a few isolated words but do little to illuminate the grammar, the syntax, or the vast majority of the vocabulary. The Khitan large script remains a proud and silent monument to a lost empire's ambition. It is a script that achieved its original goal magnificently. It created a unique and imposing visual identity for the Khitan state, a permanent declaration of their imperial power carved onto the landscape of history. Yet that very success, its deliberate complexity and isolation, is what now keeps its secret safe. We can stand before these grand stelae, admire the elegant and powerful brushstrokes, and know that we are looking at the detailed history of a mighty steppe empire, its laws, its poetry, its diplomatic correspondence. But the words themselves, carefully crafted to convey this very information, stand as the final, unbreachable barrier between us and the world they were meant to preserve. Yet the ambition of the Jin dynasty's founders far outstripped the practical realities of their administration. While the Jurchen script was a powerful symbol of sovereignty, the day-to-day governance of their vast new territories, which included millions of Chinese subjects, still relied overwhelmingly on the Chinese language and its highly developed bureaucratic tradition. This created a fascinating but ultimately unsustainable linguistic divide. The Jurchen script was used for official proclamations, for recording the deeds of emperors on stone stelae, and for communicating between the Jurchen elite, serving as a vital marker of ethnic identity and royal authority. However, for the immense task of actually running the empire, collecting taxes, keeping court records, and drafting legal codes, Chinese remained the indispensable tool. This relegated the native script to a ceremonial and prestige function, preventing it from developing the deep, widespread usage needed for it to truly flourish and evolve. It became the language of the court and the military elite, but not the language of the marketplace or the provincial administration, a situation that severely limited its everyday application and the number of people who could actually use it with fluency. This institutional bilingualism planted the seeds for the script's eventual decline, but it was the brutal and totalizing conquest by the Mongols that delivered the final blow. When the armies of Genghis Khan and his successors swept away the Jin dynasty in 1234, they did not just topple a government, they systematically dismantled the cultural and political structures that gave the Jurchen script its purpose. The Mongols, in their relentless pragmatism, had little interest in preserving the written emblem of a defeated people's identity. The Khitan script from which Jurchen was derived vanished entirely under Mongol rule, and the Jurchen script suffered a similar, though not quite as absolute fate. Its use plummeted, surviving only in small, isolated pockets and for very limited ceremonial purposes. The vast institutional knowledge, the scribes, the teachers, the archives, that sustained it was scattered and lost. Within a few generations, the ability to read and write this complex system faded into history, becoming a ghost of a language known only by a few antiquarians. This historical cataclysm is the primary reason why deciphering the Jurchen script today is such a monumental challenge. Unlike languages that evolved gradually or were supplanted by close relatives, Jurchen was severed from its living roots with shocking swiftness. The material we have to work with is both limited and incredibly repetitive. Our main sources are a handful of surviving inscriptions on stone stelae and bronze mirrors, and perhaps most importantly, a single, priceless bilingual glossary. Discovered in the late 19th century, this document, known as the Jurchen Chinese Vocabulary, is our Rosetta Stone. It lists just over 1,000 Jurchen words and phrases alongside their Chinese translations, providing a crucial, if limited, key to unlocking the script's secrets. It is from this glossary that scholars have been able to reconstruct the vast majority of the known Jurchen vocabulary. But herein lies the problem. 1,000 words is a tiny fraction of any living language. It gives us nouns for common objects, some verbs for basic actions, and a handful of titles, but it provides almost no window into the grammar, the syntax, or the richer vocabulary needed for literature, poetry, or complex philosophical thought. It's a phrasebook, not a dictionary. Consequently, our understanding of Jurchen is a patchwork of solid facts surrounded by vast areas of complete mystery. We can confidently read the words for sky, horse, emperor, and to come, but we cannot read a complete sentence. We don't understand how verbs were conjugated to indicate tense or how nouns changed to show possession. The longer inscriptions that do exist, like those on memorial stelae, remain largely impenetrable. We can pick out the names of rulers and recognize the dates, but the detailed narratives of their accomplishments are lost to us. The script stands as a silent monument to a people who carved out an empire and forged a written identity with determination, only to have the currents of history wash away almost all traces of their voice, leaving behind a beautiful and hauntingly incomplete puzzle. But the allure of runes extends far beyond the well-trodden paths of known history, venturing into the realm of the controversial and the unexplained. For every straightforward runestone declaring, Asmund raised this stone in memory of Thoria, his brother, there exists another that seems to defy all interpretation and consensus, whispering tantalizing possibilities of transoceanic voyages and lost histories. The most famous and most fiercely contested of these enigmas is the Kensington runestone, discovered in 1898, clutched in the roots of a tree on a Minnesota farm by a Swedish immigrant named Olof Öhman. This slab of grey-wacky stone bore a message that would ignite a century of academic warfare. The inscription, carved in a variant of runes, told a dramatic story. 8 Goths and 22 Norsemen on a journey of exploration from Vinland had camped here, only to return to their shoreside camp one day to find 10 of their comrades red with blood and dead. The date given was 1362. If authentic, the Kensington runestone would irrevocably rewrite the history of North American exploration, proving that Norse adventurers pushed deep into the continent's interior over a century before Columbus. The problem is that almost every aspect of the stone has been challenged. Linguists point out that the runic forms and the language used are an odd mixture, containing elements that seem archaic alongside others that appear strangely modern. The grammar includes Swedish and English influences that scholars argue would not have been present in the 14th century. Furthermore, the very existence of such a journey is absent from the Norse sagas and all other historical records. Skeptics have long maintained that the stone is a clever, if flawed, hoax, perhaps crafted by Öhman himself or by others in the local immigrant community, a piece of patriotic myth-making designed to claim a grand Viking heritage for the new Scandinavian settlers in America. Yet, the stone has never been definitively proven a fake. Proponents of its authenticity offer counter-arguments for every criticism, suggesting the strange linguistic features could be a unique dialect from an isolated group, and the lack of archaeological corroboration is simply because we haven't found it yet. They point to the sheer physical difficulty of carving such a lengthy and complex text into extremely hard stone as a deterrent for a simple farmer with no known expertise in runology. The debate has raged for over a century, fueled by patriotism, academic pride, and a deep human desire to believe in extraordinary stories. The Kensington runestone is more than an artifact, it is a Rorschach test. What you see in its carved lines often says more about what you wish to be true than what can be empirically proven. But North America is not the only stage for such mysterious runic finds. Across the Atlantic, other inscriptions defy easy explanation. The Rök runestone in Sweden, while not questioned in its authenticity, presents a different kind of puzzle. It is the longest runic inscription in the world, boasting over 760 characters, yet its meaning remains one of the most hotly debated topics in runology. The text is a complex tapestry of allusions, seemingly referencing ancient Germanic legends, heroic deeds, and cryptic riddles about the sun and the gods. It begins with a clear statement about a father raising the stone in memory of his dead son, but it quickly spirals into a dense and esoteric narrative. Scholars have interpreted it as everything from a memorial to a deceased chieftain and a recounting of his lineage, to a magical spell intended to avert a climate catastrophe. Some believe it references the volcanic winter caused by an eruption in the year 536. The Rökstone doesn't challenge history like Kensington. Instead, it challenges our ability to fully access the mindset of the past, reminding us that even when we can read the words, the cultural and symbolic context can be lost forever, leaving us with a magnificent and impenetrable poem. Further adding to the mystery are smaller, more personal objects whose runic messages remain just out of reach. The intricate runic rings found in various Scandinavian hoards, for instance, often bear extremely short and cryptic inscriptions. A ring might be inscribed with a single, powerful but ambiguous word like Luk, a small kappa, which could mean leek or onion, a symbol of growth, or it could be a personal name. Without more context, it's impossible to know if this was a charm for fertility, the name of the owner, or the name of the smith who forged it. Similarly, the brigand inscriptions found in Bergen, Norway, everyday objects like sticks and bones inscribed with runes, include some that are clearly everyday messages or ownership tags, but others that are magical incantations or cryptic phrases whose purpose is completely unknown. These objects represent the silent majority of runic finds, not grand proclamations on stone, but intimate, everyday uses of writing that are now divorced from the lives that gave them meaning. They are the fleeting text messages of the Viking Age. Their conversations abruptly ended, leaving behind a single, confusing fragment that hints at a rich world of belief, commerce, and personal expression we can only partially reconstruct. But to truly appreciate the revolutionary leap that the proto-Semitic script represents, we need to understand the monumental challenge it was designed to overcome. For centuries, the power of the written word in the Near East was held tightly by a professional class of scribes, masters of the incredibly complex systems of Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian cuneiform. These were writing systems of immense power and beauty, but they required a lifetime of study to master, utilizing hundreds, even thousands of distinct signs. They were the tools of the state, the temple, and the elite, utterly impractical for the bustling, multilingual world of international trade that was flourishing in the Sinai Peninsula. Imagine the scene at a busy mining outpost like Serabit el-Qadim, where Egyptian expeditions operated turquoise mines using a workforce of Canaanite laborers and traders. The Egyptians needed to keep records to mark ownership of goods and tools to send messages, but teaching their Canaanite workers the full, glorious complexity of hieroglyphic writing was an impossible task. A simpler, faster, more democratic system was desperately needed. The brilliant, pragmatic solution these Canaanite miners and traders devised was an act of linguistic genius known as the acrophonic principle. They looked at the elegant pictorial signs of Egyptian hieroglyphs that surrounded them, but they saw them in a completely new way. They didn't see a picture of an ox head and think, ox. Instead, they heard the first sound of the word for ox in their own Canaanite language, which was Alp. So they took the hieroglyph for an ox head and simplified its form, and they assigned it to represent not the animal but the consonant sound A. They did the same with a hieroglyph of a house. The word for house in their language was bait, so that symbol now represented the sound B. A water wave, mem in Canaanite, became M. A door, dalt, became D. This was the fundamental, world-changing innovation. The shift from a sign representing a whole idea or word to a sign representing a single sound. It was the birth of the alphabet. By distilling the entire language down to a set of just about 24 core consonant sounds, they created a system that was breathtakingly efficient and, most importantly, learnable in a matter of days or weeks, not decades. The physical evidence of this breakthrough was discovered not in a royal archive, but scratched onto the surfaces of crude stone monuments and modest statuettes in the very mines of Serabit el-Qadim. The script itself is rugged and functional, a world away from the polished elegance of formal hieroglyphic inscriptions. The characters are often awkwardly carved, a clear sign that they were being used by practical people for practical purposes, likely short dedications to the local goddess Hathor, ownership marks on mining tools, or simple commemorative messages. For a long time, these inscriptions were an utter mystery to Egyptologists. They clearly weren't standard Egyptian, yet they seemed to use simplified versions of hieroglyphic signs. The pivotal breakthrough came when scholars realized the language being written was an early form of Canaanite, and they could apply the acrophonic principle to start sounding out the words. The most famous example is the word Elbilt, meaning "for the lady, the goddess," which appears on several inscriptions. This was the proof that the system could be read, that these crude scratches were indeed the first stumbling steps of our own alphabet. Yet, despite this monumental success, Proto-Semitic remains only semi-deciphered. The reason is a familiar foe in the world of epigraphy, a devastating lack of material. We have fewer than 50 inscriptions, and most are heartbreakingly short, often just a handful of characters. There are no lengthy texts, no royal annals, no bilingual dictionaries. This scarcity makes it nearly impossible to confirm the sound values proposed for many of the more obscure characters. While the signs for B, L, and T are firmly established because they appear frequently in identifiable words, the values for at least a third of the proposed alphabet are still hotly debated among scholars. Without longer texts to provide more context and demonstrate these signs in a variety of words, their true phonetic value remains uncertain. Furthermore, the script shows significant variation between inscriptions. Different miners seem to have had slightly different ideas about how to draw the simplified signs, adding another layer of complexity to the decipherment process. This partial understanding, however, does nothing to diminish its staggering historical importance. Proto-Semitic is the crucial bridge, the evolutionary missing link that connects the pictographic writing of the ancient world with the phonetic alphabets that would follow. This revolutionary concept did not stay in the Sinai desert. It traveled with those Canaanite traders back to the Levant, where it evolved into the linear Canaanite script, which itself then branched into two world-changing directions. One branch was adopted and refined by the Phoenicians, becoming the sleek, efficient 22-letter consonantal alphabet that they spread across the Mediterranean. This Phoenician script was in turn adapted by the Greeks, who had the brilliant idea of using some of the extra signs to represent vowel sounds, creating the first true alphabet capable of representing every sound in a language with precision. From the Greeks, it passed to the Etruscans and then the Romans, whose Latin alphabet is now used by billions of people around the globe. The other major branch of that early Canaanite script developed into the ancient Hebrew and Aramaic alphabets. Aramaic became the lingua franca of the Persian Empire and, through further evolution, gave rise to the Arabic script as well as the scripts of the Indian subcontinent. Every single time you read a word in English, Spanish, or German, or read a text in Arabic or Hindi, you are using a direct descendant of that ingenious, practical solution dreamed up by Canaanite miners nearly 4,000 years ago. They sought only a better way to keep track of their tools and pay homage to their goddess, but in doing so, they unknowingly gave a written voice to half the world. Now we turn our gaze to the greatest and most impenetrable library of unwritten knowledge on Earth, the Amazon rainforest. For centuries, the prevailing narrative of the Amazon was that of a pristine wilderness, sparsely populated by small, nomadic tribes whose cultures were primarily oral. But a dramatic shift in archaeological understanding is now painting a very different picture, one of large, complex, settled societies that manage the forest with sophisticated precision. And with complex societies often comes the desire or even the need to record information in a lasting way. This brings us to one of the most haunting mysteries in linguistics, the possibility of lost Amazonian writing systems, entire libraries of knowledge that may have vanished in the catastrophic aftermath of European contact before they were ever documented by the outside world. The most compelling evidence for this lost intellectual tradition comes from the mouth of the Amazon itself, from the vast, seasonally flooded island of Marajo. Here, the Marajora culture flourished between 800 and 1400 Common Era, constructing enormous mounds of earth to elevate their villages and cemeteries above the floodwaters. They were a deeply artistic people, producing some of the most exquisite and technologically advanced pottery ever found in the Americas. It is on this pottery that we find the most tantalizing clues. Many of these ceramics are covered in intricate geometric designs, precise spirals, meandering lines, concentric circles, and complex cross-hatching. To the untrained eye, they are beautiful patterns, but some researchers, like the late anthropologist Betty Meggers, have proposed a far more radical idea, that these are not mere decorations but a form of proto-writing. The argument hinges on the incredible consistency and complexity of the designs. These are not random, freehand sketches. They are highly formalized, repeated patterns that follow strict rules of composition. They appear in specific contexts on certain types of funerary urns and ritual vessels, suggesting they carried a specific meaning beyond aesthetics. Could these patterns have served as mnemonics, a symbolic code that helped a shaman or a storyteller recall a complex genealogy, a mythological cycle, or a spiritual invocation? Were they ownership marks denoting the specific clan or lineage that produced the vessel? Or were they something even more sophisticated, a true, if limited, writing system capable of encoding the Marajora language itself? Without a living tradition or a Rosetta Stone to provide the key, the beautiful designs remain a silent, elegant enigma. They are a powerful reminder that writing doesn't have to look like the Roman alphabet or Mayan glyphs to be meaningful. It can be expressed through a visual language of geometry and symbol, a language we have yet to learn how to read. The tragedy of the Amazon is that we may never get the chance. The scale of the cultural loss following the 1600s is almost beyond comprehension. It is estimated that up to 95% of the indigenous population was wiped out by waves of European diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, against which they had no immunity. This wasn't just a demographic catastrophe, it was an intellectual apocalypse. Imagine entire cultures with their unique histories, cosmologies, medicinal knowledge, and ways of seeing the world vanishing almost overnight. Among the losses were undoubtedly systems of recording information. We have fleeting, frustrating hints from early European explorers and missionaries who reported seeing indigenous leaders using knotted cords not unlike the Andean quipu, or mats woven with patterns that seem to tell stories and record laws. One such account describes a tribal chief consulting a woven panel before giving a speech, as if reading from a text. But these artifacts, made of perishable fibers in a humid climate, stood no chance of survival once the societies that created them collapsed. The knowledge of how to read them died with their last custodians. This leads us to a profound and unsettling question. Is our current definition of writing, shaped by old-world examples, too narrow to recognize the full spectrum of how humans record thought? For the Amazonian cultures, the entire rainforest might have been their library and their text. Anthropologists like Darrell Posey have documented how indigenous groups use the complex arrangement of plants in a garden, the specific traits of a cultivated species, or the patterns of ecological relationships to encode historical and spiritual knowledge. A particular planting pattern might commemorate a battle, or a specific hybrid fruit tree might mark a boundary treaty between tribes. In this worldview, writing isn't confined to parchment or stone. It is woven into the very fabric of the lived environment. The loss of these cultures meant the loss of the cipher to read this living library. The patterns in the forest remain, but the stories they tell are now silent, their meanings known only to the trees themselves. The search for Amazonian writing, therefore, is not just about finding inscribed tablets. It is about learning to see the forest as a document, and understanding that some of history's greatest conversations were never written down in a way we would recognize, but were instead sung, woven, and planted into the world. Yet for all their differences, these mysterious scripts share a common set of barriers, a constellation of challenges that has, time and again, locked their secrets away from even our most brilliant minds. The first and most formidable of these obstacles is the sheer, crushing absence of a bilingual text, a Rosetta Stone. This isn't just a minor inconvenience, it is the single greatest decipherment killer. A bilingual text acts as a cryptographic key, providing a known language sitting directly alongside the unknown one. Without it, scholars are essentially trying to solve an equation with two variables and only one known value. They might have a general idea of the topic, a funerary inscription, a royal dedication, but without the precise translation, they cannot anchor the sound values of the signs to actual meanings. Every proposed translation becomes a house of cards, a complex theory built on a foundation of assumptions that can collapse with the discovery of a single contradictory symbol. The Pyrgi tablets for Etruscan gave us a few precious words, and the Jurchen Chinese glossary provided a basic vocabulary list, but for scripts like Linear or the Indus Valley Script, no such key has ever been found. They are locked rooms to which we have never been given a key. Even if we had that key, we would then face the second great challenge, the problem of insufficient data, or what linguists call a corpus that is too small. Decipherment is not magic, it is a science of patterns. It relies on having enough text to perform statistical analyses, to see how often certain signs appear, which signs cluster together at the beginnings of words, which ones commonly appear at the ends, and how they combine to form grammatical structures. The Voynich Manuscript, for all its bizarre allure, actually has a large corpus, and its statistical properties resemble those of a natural language, which is why the hoax theory remains so controversial. But for many other scripts, we are trying to reconstruct an entire linguistic universe from a handful of fragments. The proto-elamite script has only about 1,600 known texts, most just a few lines long. The Singapore stone is a single, shattered piece of a larger puzzle. The unknown Kushan script appears on only a handful of coins and short inscriptions. It is the linguistic equivalent of trying to understand the entire plot, themes, and character development of a novel from a single, torn-out page. There simply isn't enough recurring information to build a reliable model of the language's inner workings. Beyond the text itself lies the third, more abstract barrier, the loss of cultural context. A writing system is not an isolated abstraction. It is the product of a specific people with a specific worldview, history, and set of daily practices. When that civilization vanishes, either through conquest, assimilation, or collapse, it takes with it the living context that gave its script meaning. We can sound out Meroitic words, but we don't know the stories they were telling or the gods they were praising because the entire cultural framework of the Kingdom of Kush is gone. We can recognize a Mixtec glyph for conquest, but we have lost the oral epic that would have accompanied that image, the speeches, the strategies, the human emotion. This is the difference between reading a script and understanding a culture. We might correctly identify a word for king, but without knowing the intricacies of their political structure, the word remains an empty shell. The cultural dictionary that defines the nuance of every term, the connotations of every phrase, has been irrevocably lost, leaving us with a literal but meaningless translation. Perhaps the most intellectually humbling challenge is the possibility that we are fundamentally misidentifying the nature of the object we are studying. Our default assumption is that an unknown script must represent a full spoken language, but what if it doesn't? There is a compelling argument that some of these systems may be proto-writing, sophisticated symbolic notation that conveys information but does not directly encode speech. The Indus Valley symbols, often just 4 or 5 characters long on a seal, could easily be a system of clan identifiers, religious symbols, or administrative notations for specific quantities and goods, a powerful tool for bureaucracy, but not a vehicle for literature. The markings on the Jiahu tortoise shells or the Tartaria tablets might represent a personal signature, a ritual marker, or a tally for trade, not a phonetic rendering of a sentence. Even the Quipu of the Andes challenges our definition, operating as a 3-dimensional, tactile recording device that may have encoded narrative information through knot type, position, and chord color, yet did so in a way that was not read as sequential speech. In these cases, the very goal of finding a one-to-one correlation between sign and spoken word is a fool's errand because no such correlation ever existed. The script isn't broken. Our definition of what writing should be is simply too narrow for the incredible diversity of human invention. And so our journey through these silent alphabets and forgotten grammars brings us to a final, humbling realization. The true scale of what we have lost is not measured in the number of undeciphered scripts, but in the vast, invisible libraries of human experience they represent. Each one of these enigmatic systems, from the administrative lists of proto-elamite to the sacred chants of Rongo-Rongo, from the philosophical musings that might be locked within the Indus Valley, symbols to the royal histories of the Kushites etched in plain sight, is far more than a linguistic puzzle. They are potential windows into entire forgotten worlds, each with its own unique way of seeing the universe, its own triumphs and tragedies, its own poetry and laws that we can currently only guess at. Imagine the stories waiting to be told. The Minoan prayers hidden within linear could revolutionize our understanding of ancient Mediterranean religion. A full decipherment of the Isthmian script might finally clarify the origins of Mesoamerican civilization, settling the debate over the Olmecs' role once and for all. And cracking the code of the Meroitic language would allow the mighty kingdom of Kush, a civilization that once ruled Egypt, to tell its own history in its own voice, rather than through the records of its rivals. This isn't just about filling in blanks on a historical timeline. It's about recovering the full, rich, and diverse tapestry of human thought. Every undeciphered text is a conversation suspended in mid-sentence, a cultural universe frozen in time, waiting for the right listener to come along and hear the rest of the story. The quest to become that listener is one of the great human adventures, and it is far from over. While the challenges are immense, the lack of bilingual texts, the scarcity of material, the loss of cultural context, the tools at our disposal are more powerful than ever. Computational linguistics, artificial intelligence, and advanced imaging technologies are providing new ways to analyze patterns and extract data from faded or damaged artifacts that would have been impossible just a generation ago. A breakthrough could come at any moment, from a new archaeological discovery or a fresh perspective from a scholar looking at an old problem in a new way. This is not a pursuit reserved for a handful of academics in ivory towers. The story of these languages belongs to all of us, as it is the story of our shared human heritage. You can be a part of this ongoing discovery. Perhaps this exploration ignites a passion in you to formally study linguistics, archaeology, or history, to become one of the next generation of codebreakers. But even without a degree, your support matters immensely. You can follow the work of research institutions, engage with digital projects that aim to crowdsource decipherment, or simply advocate for the funding and preservation of our world's cultural resources. By bearing witness to these silent voices, by sharing their stories and ensuring they are not forgotten, you help keep the conversation alive. The final chapter for these ancient scripts has not been written. With curiosity as our guide and technology as our tool, we continue the patient, hopeful work of listening, hoping that one day we might finally learn what these voices from the past have been trying to